How's it going? Morning. Welcome to the first inaugural Florida Blockchain Conference, hosted by the Gator Blockchain Club. Let's get a round of applause. I'm really happy to be here. We couldn't have done this without the former presidents, the current members, the entire executive board just helping put this on. I'm really excited. We have some amazing speakers. We're going to bring about some just a really great networking and all these speakers. We're looking forward to what they have to say. Up here to my right, this is DM Suja. He's the original founder of the Gator Blockchain Club, so let's give him a round of applause as well.
Hi, can you guys hear me? I can hear me, so this is good.
He's going to say a few words, kind of kick off this conference, and then we're going to get started. So, yeah.
All right. So I wanted to be a little organized. I have a little bit of a speech prepared for you all. I know it's not as cool as off the top of my head and winging it, but hey, I'm not in college anymore, so I can't necessarily wing it anymore. So hello, my name is DM Suja, and I am one of the co-founders of the Gator Bitcoin Club, which is now the Gator Blockchain Club. I want to thank each and every one of you today for coming here and making it safely. It is really an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I was a remote student at UF, and I was studying entrepreneurship with a curiosity towards blockchain and Bitcoin. But I didn't have anyone to share this curiosity with. I felt alone and kind of weird because at the time, no one was talking about blockchain. So here I am, a weird fellow that had this curiosity, but I didn't have anyone to chat with. So when I started this club, my main goal was to be surrounded by like minds. And I looked at all these people in this room. What an amazing group. What amazing like minds this club has attracted. I can't believe it. So I'm both surprised and thrilled. I want to give a big thanks and congrats to the current leadership that has put all of this amazing awesomeness together. So if you will, give them a big round of applause. Thank you guys. You have really outdone yourselves, and I'm proud to call you all my friends. So, let's see. Alright, let's start with the past, alright? We have come far in our club, and we have also come in blockchain and Bitcoin. I remember getting my first Bitcoins from a faucet, then quickly forgetting about the whole ordeal. I was in high school at the time, so it was blockchain and then homework, which I probably should have just done more blockchain, to be honest. I remember hearing people buying pizza with blockchain. I heard about people buying alpaca socks with blockchain. Not as cool as the pizza buy, but hey, those are now some very expensive alpaca socks. Gladly, I did not buy those, but my computer burned and crashed, so I lost pretty much all of my Bitcoin, roughly $89 million. But hey, I will make it back some way, somehow. So, we recently had the 10th anniversary of Bitcoin. And wow, it's been a fantastic and thrilling 10 years. From the early days to now, from obscurity to global prominence, and that is true. Everywhere you go, blockchain is there. We now have smart contracts, different mining algorithms, wallets that are somewhat user-friendly, and of course, a host of ICOs, roughly around 21,000 if you're looking into CoinMarketCap. And of course, we can't forget CryptoKitties. Come on, CryptoKitties are the future. Okay, so there is more to come. I believe that's why we're here at the precipice of human history. So today, my friends, I'd like to talk to you about the future that is emerging because of blockchain. Because blockchain, cryptocurrency, and Bitcoin really are the start of a new future, a start of a whole new world of possibilities. This new world of possibilities is a tremendous gift and a huge responsibility for each and every single one of us. Each and one of us in this room and throughout the world for generations to come can shape this new future in ways we can't fathom yet. Although, I will give it a shot, alright? I imagine a colony on Mars sending back taxes to Earth using Dogecoins. I imagine spaceships using quantum teleportation and quantum internet systems to communicate with each other and send Litecoins for transactions. I imagine, I imagine a lot actually. I also like to imagine asteroid mining profits being stored in Bitcoin, the original gold of the cryptocurrency world. I'd also like to imagine AI-powered IRA accounts on the Ethereum network that makes retirement possible for every single millennial in this room, and perhaps a non-millennial as well. All these things and more are now possible, minus the quantum internet. We haven't cracked that one yet, but hey, we're gonna get there. This task of transformation is your birthright and destiny. And yes, it will be a challenge. Your character defines your destiny. Your friends and your family and even your acquaintances may criticize you and your outlook. And you may perceive that as a threat to your character, a threat to who you are. You may have doubts and fears. And this is all right. This is completely unknown territory. It's like the darkness of space. Never in human history have we walked this road, which is completely true. A little fear and a little doubt helps us survive, especially with the ICOs. You have to understand, there's a lot of shitcoins out there. All right. You see, in the darkness, there's always light. And when there is no light, you must become the light you seek. And this is very hard to do, but fear not, there's hope. The luminance of your curiosity will help you blaze a new path for you and everyone else involved. You will need to learn new things, such as what else? Decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges, trading, and a whole host of other things. Your paradigms will be challenged and even changed. You will constantly need to learn, unlearn, and relearn to first adapt to this new world. Then you will need to have courage, bravery, tenacity, and of course a good heart to shape this new world. Some of you have already demonstrated this, and some of those lovely crypto people are our esteemed speakers today. Perhaps they felt what I have felt, and what we all feel inside, the call of our crypto destiny. It's like magnetism on a level of our entire being. It calls to us to build a newer, better world. This is the question, will you answer? Welcome to the first inaugural blockchain conference at Florida, and may you meet your destiny head on. Thank you. I'll give it back to Rob and he'll introduce everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, DM. And I think DM touched on something just truly very important, that the best is yet to come. I've heard a lot of people in Bitcoin and in crypto, feel like they've missed out, whether it be because of the exponential price rise, because of just other news items that have happened in the space. And I truly agree with DM in that. The best is yet to come. And I think everyone gathered here can agree with that. And that's why you're here. With that being said, I'd like to thank our sponsors that also allow us to be here. Mousebelt, the Chamber of Digital Commerce, Protonode Strategies, and Northwestern Mutual have all been able to sponsor us today. They help us actually put things like this on and give back to the community like you. So we are eternally grateful for all of their help. And we're going to get started. So we got the first few speakers up here. We're going to start with Anessa Santos in the human rights and the intersection of blockchain. So Anessa, big round of applause.
Hey, thank you. That was a great introduction. I think the remote control is smarter than I am. This could be problematic. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am so excited to be here today to have this opportunity to talk to you about an issue that is deeply important to me. It's something that I'm really passionate about. And I'm going to figure out how this works. Yeah. Oh, okay. Aha, very good. Thank you. Okay, so back in undergraduate, where I attended Wright State University, probably about the time that most of you were born, or maybe even a few years before you were born, I had this incredible opportunity to study human rights. So I majored in diplomacy and human rights right at the time when the Bosnian peace accords were being negotiated across the street at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And a couple of my professors in human rights were on part of the negotiation and mediation teams. So I had this unique perspective of hearing their reports of what was going on for as much as they were able to disclose in each of my classes. And this was really remarkable for me because for those of you who don't know me, I was actually born and raised in backwoods Ohio. And the most important dispute was whether or not you were going to plant corn or soybeans and how that affected your neighbor's crops. And so for me, this was the first opportunity that I had to understand what was going on in the world. And the incredible methods of torture and terror that was being rained down upon our neighbors to the south with the assistance of the US government. These were actions that I thought could only happen in the bowels of hell. And I had no idea that these sorts of atrocities were happening to people that I would soon come to know and love. So at that time, when I was exposed to what was really going on, I had decided, I want to do something about this. So I decided that I wanted to be a human rights attorney, and I enrolled in law school. But nobody told me that human rights doesn't pay your law school debt. So afterwards, I joined the Office of the Public Defender in Fort Myers, Florida, once I was licensed as an attorney. And for those of you who don't know, if you ever watch Netflix or Hulu, and somebody's arrested and the cop says, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you. That was me. Those are your public defenders. And contrary to popular opinion, well, we are the front lines for civil rights. We are the front lines for human rights that are happening on a daily basis in our communities around us and to those that we know and we love. While I was at the Office of the Public Defender, I had this great opportunity to practice my Spanish, which was required for you to study foreign languages when you're an international studies major. And this was really great because a lot of the clients that I represented were folks from Latin America who didn't speak English at all or very well, many of whom didn't even speak Spanish. Many of them were indigenous to Central America, South America. They spoke languages like Iche, Comhuval. And so I had this opportunity to be exposed to all of these wonderful and beautiful cultures. And there was one gentleman in particular that I had this remarkable honor of representing. We'll call him Roberto. Now that's not his real name. Of course, attorney-client privilege applies, and I can't tell you who he really was. But Roberto sat down in my office with one of his friends, and he was maybe in his 30s to the best of my recollection. And I had all of my little Spanish books in there with me, right? Because I came from backwoods Ohio. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to practice the language that I had studied. And so when you get all of these representatives from the individual countries of Latin America, they all have their different jargon and their dialect. And they were so thankful that I cared enough to even try. They were really patient with me. So Roberto sits across from me, and he was arrested. And they charged him with fleeing without violence. And I said, all right, tell me your story. And he says to me, well, you know, I was driving down the road, and then I saw in my rear view mirror, there was a truck, and the truck looked like any kind of normal truck that you would see, but there were these lights flashing in the window, and it turned out to be a cop. And I said, well, it says here that you didn't pull over. Why didn't you pull over? And he says, well, because I thought it was a Guadalajara. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't, what? He says, I thought it was a Guadalajara. And I looked at him and I thought, did he just say Guadalajara? So I said, did you just say Guadalajara? And he goes, yes. I said, I'm really, really sorry. I don't know what that is. And he says to me, he says, well, you know, out in Immokalee, where he's picking tomatoes, 32-pound buckets for $62 a day, these folks, they harvest approximately 4,000 pounds per day per worker. And he says, well, you know, I can't open a bank account because I'm undocumented. And of course, this was many, many years ago. And so things have changed a little bit. But back then, you couldn't open a bank account. And there wasn't a lot going on in Immokalee anyway. There still isn't. I spent 15 years in Naples. He says, so what we have to do is we get paid in small bills, in cash on a daily basis. And we have to keep them on us at all times because people will try to rob you. And he says, and we wad it up, and it's this big wad, and he pulled it out of his pocket. It's this huge wad of small bills, and it's moldy. And, you know, because they're out there in the fields, and they're sweating it out. If you've ever worked under the summer sun in Florida, you know what I'm talking about. It'll nearly kill you. And he says, well, and just before we go to the Western Union, there are some other folks. And the Guatemalan people are a little bit smaller by stature, genetically, traditionally, culturally, right? And so, I need to say ethnically, but nevertheless, when they know, they can see the size of the wallet in their pocket, and they try to attack them on the way to the Western Union. And if you're successful and you hit up a Guatemalan, you hit the Guatemala. Well, I was appalled, absolutely appalled. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I get to be a human rights attorney right here, right now. And so I got to help Roberto, and a lot of people like him, but I want to tell you, in 100% honesty, I have been deeply troubled by the fact that this is still going on in our fields of Immokalee today and around Florida, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. Until last year about this time, the Law and Technology Committee of the Florida Bar Association said, hey you, because I sit on the committee, why don't you learn something about blockchain and smart contracts and get up and teach it to us for continuing legal education technology credits at the annual Florida Bar Conference? So I did. I dedicated over 105 hours to this study, and it was late at night when all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, blockchain has these phenomenal implications for human rights, not just for Roberto, but for so many different areas of life that we can change for the underprivileged, the underserved, the economically disadvantaged. And so while I don't want to get into the absolute weeds, the technical details as how blockchain works, there'll be a lot of folks after me that are going to talk about that in detail. We need to just touch upon the highlights so that you can understand the context of how blockchain positively impacts the human rights industry. So blockchain is amazing because it replaces third-party intermediaries like a bank. So if Joey and John want to conduct a transaction with each other, but they don't know each other, they don't trust each other. So what do? They use a bank for escrow. You don't have to do that with blockchain. You can exchange money person to person. And that's how Roberto would be served. He wouldn't need Western Union. He could transmit his money as he received it, and then there would be no more Guatemala situations. And then I said, well, this is remarkable. Oops, oh my goodness. Okay, this is not good. Okay, there we go. So I was like, how else can blockchain impact human rights, right? And so here's a few different areas that we're going to take a brief look at to see how it might work. When I was studying blockchain at the University of Oxford a few months ago, one of the projects that we worked on in my group was refugees and identity. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights provides these really great statistics that there are about 68 million people that are forcibly displaced internally within the nations in which they live worldwide. Of that, 25.4 million are refugees, like you hear about the migrant caravan that's coming up through Central America and into Mexico and approaching our border. These people might fall into the refugee category. And you may have heard about the encouragement that they seek asylum, which is a legal process so that they can get legal protection and a formal identity given to them by the state in which they seek residency. And that's something that we as a nation agreed to under the United Nations 1951 Protocol, Refugee Convention in the 1967 Protocol, and the 1980 Refugee Act that was implemented here in the US. So, United Nations World Food Program has something called building blocks. And what they've done is they have rolled out a blockchain in the country of Jordan, which is suffering a lot under the Syrian refugee crisis. And what's really amazing is that they've been able to successfully register over 100,000 Syrians on this blockchain, issue them legally identifiable identities so that they can integrate, they can get jobs, they can get an education, all of these things that all of us in this room may take for granted. I mean, think about all the things that you use your ID for, right? You couldn't come to the school if you didn't have an identification, proof who you say you are. You couldn't drive a vehicle because you couldn't get a driver's license. You couldn't open a bank account. You couldn't even go to a bar and get a beer. So having an officially recognized government ID is critical to being able to participate in the society in which you live. And what they discovered, what was so amazing, is that this particular program was able to save $150,000 each month in bank transaction fees alone because they're conducting transactions for these refugees over a blockchain. Think about what they could do with that extra 150 grand. think about how Roberto could be served. So there are all of these different aspects to financial transactions that blockchain can revolutionize, right? So Bloom is a company who I just happen to know. I don't work for them, they're not my client. So this isn't like a shout out to Bloom. But what's really exciting about them is their goal is to break up the credit cartels. You know about the TransUnion, Equifax, Transferia credit unions, and how they pretty much monopolize what your rates are going to be for loans and what you're eligible for. And it's a bit of an issue, right? Because if your identity was stolen, try convincing the 3 credit agencies of that. So Bloom has invented this great blockchain, and their goal is to break up what I like to call the credit cartel. There are a lot of amazing companies like Travadium is working on a blockchain to tokenize your assets, your house, your car, whatnot, so that you can obtain value in lending and economic opportunities that you might not otherwise have had access to, and by offering up fractional ownership in some of those assets that you might have. Another area that this is going to be really helpful to assisting in the area of human rights is in blockchain supply chain management for product provenance. So when we think about the coalition of homophily workers that we had a few slides back, we were talking about Roberto and sort of the way that they're treated and what they have to go for, and the issue of blood diamonds, sustainable forestry. Okay. So there's a lot going on, right? The coalition of homophily workers is not utilizing blockchain, but what they are lobbying for is for humane labor standards, worker education programs, third-party audits of these farms that are abusing these farmers, and it has resulted in a substantial reduction in wage theft, trafficking, and sexual crimes. I represented 14 Salvadorans who were charged with gang rape, and the evidence was the victim bit off the tip of the tongue of one of the defendants, right? So these are real issues. Many of you may be familiar with blood diamonds. It's Leonardo DiCaprio did a great movie about this several years back, and about how diamonds are being mined and sold to fund rebel activities in Africa. And there is a crisis of folks whose limbs were hacked off because they were mining the diamonds the way the cartel leaders wanted them to. Sustainable products, when we think about where do you get your timber from, where do you get your coffee from, is this slave labor? All of this information can be registered on a blockchain so that you know exactly where your products are coming from, and that there's no opportunity for fraud, no opportunities for lies. Other areas of blockchain can service in order to provide truth to management of funds and where your products come from and how the individuals are being treated that are processing your products. Or what about charitable donations? Is the money that you give to that organization actually going to serve the people that you thought it was going to serve? What about government waste, government spending? Think about the Odebrecht scandal that completely tanked the economy of Brazil, Argentina, and just really racked over Chile and Peru. That would not have been able to happen if government spending were registered on a blockchain, and therefore you had complete accountability for funds. Fisheries, wildlife, natural resource management, and energy distribution. If we register all these things on a blockchain, then we as individuals and as a society can come together and say, we can hold you accountable for how you are expending our resources, how you are expending our taxpayer funds. You are no longer going to be allowed to enslave Roberto and his families and other people like him so that we can buy our tomatoes at 1 penny cheaper. So come find me afterward, talk to me, tell me, what will you blockchain?
So Blockspaces started as a Bitcoin meetup in 2013. So everything that you're doing here now is very reminiscent of how we were in 2013. And we started as a Bitcoin meetup, and our meetup grew tremendously as the space grew. And I'm going to kind of go out of sequence of my slides because I'm kind of rogue. And now we have a dedicated space in Tampa, Florida for education and development that has 10 meetups. And we do something almost every single night. And we have everything from our regular Bitcoin meetup to our chain meetups to developer meetups. We're Hyperledger Tampa, we're Ethereum Tampa, we're our chain Tampa, we're Corda Tampa. And they all meet at this one place, and we have an in-house development shop. We just put a course, we're giving a course in the middle of the month that's accredited for CLE credits. So we have evolved as the space has evolved. And so we're just here by association of this space, and we are very excited to have you guys as part of that space. We're very closely affiliated with the new innovation hub that Jeff Vinnick is sponsoring in downtown Tampa. That's in conjunction with Cascade Investments, which is Bill Gates. That's a $3 billion technology innovation redevelopment of downtown Tampa. Blockspaces will be very closely aligned with them as well. So we invite you all definitely down to Tampa. We wanted to do a little bit of a blockchain 101 today, but I don't want to be condescending about it. You guys, we have people come to us all the time and say, explain blockchain to me like I'm 5, and I always say, if you were 5, you would understand it. Because it's not you guys that have difficulty understanding it. It's 40 and over. So we don't want to be condescending. You're very smart. You're at University of Florida, which is one of the hardest schools to get into, and you're young. So my daughter's 14. She's been getting Bitcoin as her allowance for the last 4 years. My son is a gamer. He's been dealing with Bitcoin for the last 5 years. I know you guys understand this. So we just kind of want to walk you through a little bit of what our blockchain 101 is. And if you guys have any questions, we would much prefer to run this like we do every other night of the week as sort of like an informal meetup. And we invite you guys to ask questions and interact with us all the way through it. So that took me completely awkward right now.
Yeah, we normally do like our meetups, like this is more of an interactive type engagement. But of course, we were putting this together, kind of morphed into a presentation.
And I want to let you guys know that we were actually going to bring one of our developers with us today. Mike is our Director of Community Engagement. I'm the co-founder of Blockspaces. Gabe's my other co-founder. But we were going to bring on one of our developers today, but we are in the middle of developing projects. And so, as the gentleman before us talked about insurance, we have an insurance project that we're developing out of Blockspaces on Corda, which is an insurance kind of fintech chain. We do development on Hyperledger. We do development on our chain. So we are actively doing development. We are also very closely following what's happening on the Bitcoin blockchain because we believe there's an amazing amount of development happening there. It's just in a slow, methodical pace. And we're going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin today because we think it's very important to understand Bitcoin to really understand the value proposition of blockchain and the difference between a distributed ledger and a blockchain, which is also a little bit different. So we want to talk to you guys. We do want to give like a quick little Bitcoin 101 because that is why we're here. That is, Bitcoin started it all. It is still the most secure blockchain, most successful use case of blockchain. So we are going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin too, so sorry.
Bitcoin is the granddaddy of them all. Is Mr. Governor still in the room?
He stepped up.
I wanted to mention to him because he was talking about a life insurance contract and how no one's doing it yet. We're actually in the middle of a 10-week engagement in our Thursday night meetups, which is our enterprise use case platform, and they are writing a life insurance policy as an addendum to the issuance of a loan, and there are companies that are looking at that very seriously. So we are actually attempting to execute and implement that. Mr. Governor, I was just saying that we are actually working Thursday nights in our enterprise meetups on implementing a smart contract that issues a life insurance policy for mid-market insurance company, I think, is looking into the possibility of having that life insurance policy as an addendum to a loan issuance so as to mitigate the risk of that loan throughout the life cycle of paying it back.
Yeah, that's Corda.
We'd love to have you live stream into one of our presentations and see what we have going on there. It's a very, very cool meetup. Make sure I'm going the right way here.
Yeah, some of these we'll just flip through because some of them have been talked about in the presentations prior. So obviously, blockchain is a huge industry. It's growing exponentially. It continues to grow. The market valuations of some of these industries are just absolutely tremendous. So there's huge room for growth, huge room for opportunity.
And this is the Blockspaces pitch. Rosa gives this, she can give this in her sleep right now, but Blockspaces is really an awesome collaboration center, and we really encourage anybody to come check us out in Tampa in person if you're ever there. And we also have a live stream platform where you can log in and watch any of our meetups, in our Mining Monday, Trading Tuesday, Bitcoin meetups on Wednesdays, and our enterprise use case on Thursdays, and all the different one-offs that we have throughout the week, even on the weekends. So I'm going to talk about Bitcoin. I'm going to attempt to explain this in 10 minutes. And I wanted to say real quick that I was so excited when Rosa and Gabe invited me to share the stage with them for two reasons. One, I love talking about Bitcoin to the extent that I'm forbidden to do so by certain people in my life because I talk about it so often. And two, like Mr. Governor here, I'm a UF grad. So I roamed these halls about 15 years ago, and this is the first time in those 15 years that I've been back on campus for anything other than a football game, a basketball game, or a baseball game. So it's really cool to be back here at the Rights Union. It feels very nostalgic. I'm enjoying it, especially when I get to talk about something that I love so much and I'm so passionate about. But before I do go on, I will mention that I am going to the game tomorrow. I don't have a ticket, so if anybody's selling, I got Bitcoin. Mr. Governor was saying that Bitcoin is not blockchain, and we agree with that. But when it comes to understanding blockchain, it's helpful to understand what Bitcoin is, because any application, any network, any protocol that ascribes to itself the term blockchain can trace its roots in one way, shape, or form back to the Bitcoin protocol. This is the cryptocurrency part of the presentation, so what would it be without a crypto meme? This one's pretty popular on Twitter, Reddit, and some of the other crypto-heavy platforms. And I think this meme says something because Bitcoin is much less of a 10 to 12 minute presentation, and it's much more a long-term educational endeavor. It's a journey of understanding it. And the fun, crazy thing about Bitcoin is the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And the more you realize you have so much more to learn to come to an elaborate understanding of this awesome new technology. And when was it DM Suja, one of the co-founders of the group earlier, was speaking, he was saying that there was a time when he felt all alone, he couldn't understand it. Anybody who's been into Bitcoin since before 2017, even people getting into it right now, we have all been there. And it's fun because you get to talk about your journey with people that you meet, fellow Bitcoiners. It always becomes kind of a little bonding moment. That journey for everyone, again, is traceable in some way, shape, or form back to the Bitcoin white paper. It was released on October 31st. I thought I changed that, but 10 years ago, this past Wednesday, so happy birthday, Bitcoin. Crazy that it's only been 10 years, but remember those are 10 crypto years, so it's like it's been around a century. Again, I want to get through this real quickly because when Gabe talks about the enterprise use cases, I want him to have ample time for that. I was timing this last night, and I have a problem always to keep myself up to a limited amount of time. What I want people to understand is that this white paper doesn't introduce any new technologies. It introduced a new concept called proof of work. Colloquialism for that is mining. But it's really an amalgamation of already existing technologies, tried and true technologies that have come together in such a way that we have a cheap, secure, reliable, peer-to-peer electronic cash system that is trustless, permissionless, and censorship resistant, which is huge for humanity. But again, all the technology is in there, cryptographic hash functions, digital signatures, Merkle trees, simple stack programming language, sprinkled with economic incentives is what enables that. And that's what the white paper gave us. And through that ingenious blending of all these technologies, we know that when we broadcast a transaction to the Bitcoin network, as the owner, only we, as the owner, can send this provably scarce digital asset. Only the intended recipient can receive it. There's no interference. And the asset can only exist in one place at one time, right? And that's in one of these blocks as part of the blockchain. Because remember, a blockchain or a ledger is really just a data structure. And I can go on for 10 minutes on each one of these bullets, and I have before. I probably rambled far too often. But one of the things to understand about Bitcoin is that it has given us new features for a payment system that were heretofore unachievable, especially with respect to micropayments. There have been a lot of very smart minds working for a very long time to try and solve this very difficult problem in finance. And it is now feasible with this new technology. It's not being implemented yet because, again, we're still building infrastructure in the space, but micropayments are in the near future thanks to Bitcoin. So what Bitcoin isn't, and again, this is introductory, but it's just important to point out, there is no brick and mortar structure for Bitcoin. There is no headquarters because it's not a company. There's no board. There's no executive committee. There's no employees on payroll. There's no shareholders. It's not an organization. It's definitely not an MLM scheme. Everybody in this room probably knows that, but we host a lot of meetups in Tampa. We get, just tons of people that come. Our attendance is directly correlated with the price valuation of Bitcoin, by the way. It's kind of funny. We've actually proven it statistically. We run a regression line to 90% confidence level. But we get people that come in and they will actually pitch us their MLM scheme. It normally has something to do with cloud mining. By the way, I present every Monday for our Mining Mondays. If you show me 1,000 proposals for a cloud mining operation, I'll show you 999, perhaps even 1,000 scams. So it's not an MLM scheme. That's not Bitcoin. And just something we mention all the time, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. You can't just come into this space and expect to make a lot of money very quickly. It's a very rapidly developing new space. It's intensely competitive. There is money to be made, but you got to slog your way through uncharted territory. So you and anybody else, please tell people not to invest more than they can afford to lose if you are going to invest in Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. And the last thing I'll talk about before passing it off to Gabe is miners. And we see this guy here right now. And mining is really a colloquialism for that concept proof of work that I talked about that was first revealed in the Bitcoin white paper. But a miner is really a piece of hardware, anything ranging from a CPU to a GPU to these newly manufactured specialized supercomputers that we call ASIC miners that allocate their processing power to solving math problems in order to create the feature of the Bitcoin network, the main feature, which is immutability. And again, I teach this, I present on this every Monday night from 7 to 8:30 or 9. Again, you can live stream it, or you can log in and watch the live stream of that on Monday nights. But we talk about the state of the industry, we talk about what's going on with the manufacturers, we talk about mining economics, we talk about break-even analysis, and a lot of people have come in on the verge of making a very substantial investment into a mining operation, or they've already invested in a mining operation and they're wondering whether or not they should cut their losses. And every single time that's happened, we have helped the person make the decision that is not to invest in mining, because there's a lot of variables to profitability of mining that most people don't consider. Remember, this is a new paradigm, this is a new protocol. There's new functionalities, and there's new variables you have to include as part of your investment analysis. And so we've helped people understand those, most notably the ridiculously large increase in the hash rate that we've seen, especially over the past 6 to 8 to 10 months. Me and Gabe talk about it all the time. I mean, it's inconceivably large what's going on with the processing power of the Bitcoin supercomputer. It's amazing. It's the largest supercomputer that we've ever seen, and I don't know if we'll ever get anything larger. And again, the miners, so they provide immutability, which makes Bitcoin an effective payments platform, because immutability just means you can't go back in the data structure to previous blocks and change any of the transactional data. If you could do that, you'd be double spending, and it would be no longer functional as a payments protocol. On top of immutability, it's also a new model of network security. And just to give you an idea of the overall hash rate of the Bitcoin network right now, I mentioned cryptographic hash functions were part of the established technologies in the white paper. In total, right now, one cryptographic hash function, it's an input-output function. It's very simple calculation for a computer to do. But with all these new ASIC miners on there, right now on the Bitcoin network, there are 50 million trillion cryptographic hash functions per second securing that network. That is amazing, mind-boggling security. And on top of that, the miners, they have to pay for this, right? Because these things are running hot, and we are, quite frankly, burning a lot of coal with Bitcoin. It's not, there are some environmental challenges. We also talked about that at Mining Monday. That's something we need to carefully consider and analyze, because that's going to be an important consideration for the future of the network. But the miners are incentivized to burn that electricity and to pay for it because there's a bounty, and they win Bitcoin. So not only does mining create immutability and a new model of network security, it also is a new mint. It's a new printing press for money. It's a new way to have a decentralized treasury, which is really super, super cool. Yep, I went over. I'm going to do this. I was going to tell you about this. This is a college game day story right here, and it's really the first public payments thing. I don't know if you guys know about the Highmont and Bitcoin thing. This actually happened during the Kick 6. This was in Auburn, when Auburn ran the kick on back, that crazy day, that crazy game. This guy put up this sign. It's got a lot of implications. Anyways, he ended up with over 22 Bitcoin in his account after people saw that on TV, which was close to $30,000 valuation at the time. So pretty cool little story there. That's a good amount of money to run into when you're in college. That'll get you a long way in Auburn or Gainesville. But think about what this means for charitable organizations, the potential of this, for political movements, for fighting oppression. It's really, really cool. And then the Bitcoin pizza story, I'm not going to tell us, it takes me a couple minutes to say, but it also happened in Florida. Basically, a Bitcoin developer wanted to see if this magic internet money was real. So he said, hey, I'll pay somebody 10,000 Bitcoin if you send me 2 pizzas. Here's the toppings I like in my house. Guy from the UK sends them. Those 10,000 Bitcoins at the time, you could buy 400 Bitcoin for $1 or about $25. But at the peak of the market, the Bitcoin pizza index hit nearly $200 million. So the valuation of those 2 pizzas. And you'll see all these stories about it. A lot of people get it, a lot of the publications have it out of context. Some people are just flat out wrong. But the Bitcoin pizza story is really worth looking into. The best links are on the Bitcoin Talk forum. Gabe Higgins is, this is the guy who started all the Bitcoin Tampa Bay stuff that evolved into Blockspaces. Gabe and Rosa together. He's going to talk about enterprise use cases. He's going to follow up a tough one there, Mr. Governor.
And Mike could talk literally for the rest of the day and probably the rest of the weekend about Bitcoin. So if you want to talk to him about that, find him at Gabe, and he will talk your ear off.
Set up. Thanks, Mike. Thank you guys for coming and having this event. This is a great event, and this, of course, is a great school of entrepreneurship and innovation. So we're really excited to be here. Of course, Blockspaces coming from Tampa, but we hope to spread to the rest of Florida and hopefully the rest of the United States. But so now that we understand a little bit about how Bitcoin works, which is how the first blockchain, the biggest blockchain, the most used blockchain in existence right now. We talked about some of the use cases. Of course, we have some notables that have recognized kind of early on the value proposition here. And it really has to do with securing digital information. As we move forward more into the digital age, this is going to become more and more important, and it's become apparent with the many hacks that happen that have compromised probably a majority of our personal identification and personal information. So this is a problem. Of course, like I said, these notables are seeing what's happening here. And so this isn't some kind of fad, even though lately blockchain has become this, hot topic of conversation, this new kind of buzzword, and a lot of hype surrounds it, of course. Maybe that's why you're here, which is good. But it's good to learn more about it, more about how the technology itself works. And this is a fundamental change in technology. Understand that blockchain
has solved a computer science problem that has plagued us since computers existed, which is that double spending problem. And with that, we've created decentralized networks that have achieved consensus in a decentralized way. So this is a radical innovation, and it's fundamentally changing how we manage and transmit value across the internet. This is why we haven't had digital money before, because we couldn't solve the double spending problem. But this is what Satoshi Nakamoto released with his white paper. This is how we solved it with this system, this unique novel system. And now we're exploring the many other use cases, as Carl mentioned earlier. We're in the beginning stages of this discovery phase, right? So we're still very, very early on. So don't think you've missed the boat at all. We're just started, and it's disrupting many industries, and we're going to see how in many ways it's disrupted. But decentralization isn't kind of like it's not like a destination where you can plant your flag. It's like there's a spectrum here, and decentralization is important to these blockchain mechanisms, the systems, because we're moving away from centralized entities of control, where the places that become honeypots for your information and value and storage. And of course, that's where the hackers are targeting now. Instead of targeting bank vaults, they're targeting these centralized server systems. So the way to protect that is with these distributed networks that blockchain utilizes and leverages. So in decentralized peer-to-peer networks, it's very fault tolerant, because there is no central point of failure. There is no central point that you can attack. And the resilience of the network grows with the network itself. So the more nodes that there are on the network, the more resilient that system becomes, and the more censorship and hack resistant it becomes. So this is where the world is moving towards. Just like with information itself, we started with very closed source entities controlling the sources of information and being able to distribute information. And then the printing press came along and distributed that power, right? And we've seen this many, many, many times throughout history with different kinds of technology and innovation. And this is all kind of bending towards a decentralized and distributed network model. So now we're doing that with value itself, being able to spread value and information, like what happened with the internet itself. So with this kind of system, there is no cheating. There's no easy way to kind of change the value that you say you had, because everything that you had can be proven mathematically, cryptographically. And you can't cheat that system, because that value is broadcast to the rest of the network. Everybody knows what everybody has at any given time, and it can be proven mathematically. So you can't cheat that kind of system, because you can say, oh, I own more than I actually do, but the rest of the network knows that you're lying. So you can't cheat that. And this is very, very important to be able to have this kind of value transfer mechanism. And so how blockchains actually work, it uses this, like Mike mentioned, it uses these different technology mechanisms and kind of wraps it up in a new novel way. And so every block, a block is a block of transactions, a block of data that can be verified by the network. And each block is given like a fingerprint, a digital fingerprint that can't be changed or manipulated in any way with a cryptographic hash function. It's a one-way function, so you can have a hash generated from an input of data, but you can't go backwards and kind of decrypt that data. And each fingerprint is given to a block. And then when a new block is formed, the previous block's fingerprint is inputted into the new block. And so you have this chain of blocks, blockchain, that's where the name came from, that can be proven that every point on the block, every data set hasn't been changed or manipulated in any way, because you can prove that with a digital fingerprint. Any bit of information, literally any bit of information has changed, changes the entire fingerprint to where it's completely different. So you can easily identify any kind of trickery going on. And so, like we've all mentioned so far, that there's many use cases to this kind of data set, this data structure. And we're just now, again, in the beginning stages of discovering all the different things you can do with blockchain. And we'll see which ones work, which ones won't. Well, we've already seen many failures. Of course, we've seen many things that are just outright scams. And we'll see more, unfortunately, but with that, we're going to see where the true innovation happens. We're going to see where this technology really sticks. And of course, right now, the biggest use case, of course, is financial transactions with digital currencies, cryptocurrencies. So the value chain that's being made here with this kind of innovation is really impacting a lot of different businesses and different ways that we're able to transact and prove that certain things are owned in certain ways, right? We're moving from a physical world into a digital world. And this kind of system, this kind of mechanism to be able to transact in more frictionless ways without all the intermediaries is going to help us become more free, really. It's going to help us, enable us to take back control of all of the stuff that we interact with throughout our lives. So this is an innovation that brings the power back to the people, in my opinion. And that's why I'm really excited and passionate about it, and helping other people realize that they can take control like we've never had before. And so that's really important to understand. And so that's why this is like a revolution to me and to many people. And just like what the internet did for communications, blockchains are doing for the internet of value and value transfer and ownership of digital information. So we're excited to be here, and again, we're excited that you can join us, and we got plenty of time to answer any questions you may have. Don't feel at all like any question is stupid. We understand that this is very complicated stuff. It's tricky. It takes a while to understand. Completely sympathize with that. So we encourage you to ask your questions, and by all means. So, thank you. Get a microphone. Okay, yeah. Yes, sir.
The slide before had the different activities.
Thank you. On this one, on the financial, if you look through to treasury repos, that's an activity that is a trading activity that's performed by global investment banks. One aspect of your presentation that you didn't go into too much was the private blockchain versus the public blockchain.
Yep.
If I'm one of those investment banks, I want to have a private blockchain
Sure.
so that I can have some competitive advantage in the marketplace. Can you please address that?
Yes, great question and good observation. Yes, now we've seen.
Can I address it in one word?
Sure.
Ripple.
Yes. So there are now different kinds of blockchains. Like I said, there's like this sliding scale of decentralization. There's a spectrum here. And now we've seen where completely open and decentralized networks, such as Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, Ethereum, for instance, to where other entities are wanting a little bit more control over their blockchain, being able to set the parameters in certain ways and be able to change them. Those are more permission blockchains, so you can have a controlled permission blockchain that you can kind of change those parameters. Those are more akin to centralized networks that we have now. They just introduce some of the ledger aspects of the hashing and the transaction of blocks. My concern with those kinds of systems is that you're being more and more susceptible to some kind of attack by some kind of centralized entity, or just some kind of vulnerability. Security vulnerability comes when something is more centralized. The more decentralized you move, the more secure you can be on these kinds of frameworks. So, but excellent questions. There's projects like that we deal with, like Hyperledger is IBM's blockchain solution. Hyperledger Fabric is something our team has built some products on, and R3's Corda. Corda is another permission kind of blockchain. So these aren't bad things necessarily. It's just different. It's just a different way of doing things, and of course, entities like to have some more control over their systems. But if it's not, you have to be aware of the security risk with the more permission blockchains. Yes, sir, down here, and then we'll get you over here. Oh, you in the hat have one question too?
Hi, my name is Arash, and my question might be still a bit somehow, but I want to know who owns data. I mean, in decentralized or the private blockchain?
Good question. So on the decentralized network, or any of these networks, if you're on the network, everybody owns it. But there is a caveat that these, like for instance, Bitcoin transactions are just a string of alphanumeric characters. Your personal identity isn't necessarily tied to those transactions that are on the open blockchain. However, if you're operating through an exchange, they do all the KYC and AML requirements, regulations, so your identity is tied to that Bitcoin wallet. So you can be identified, and then all the Bitcoins that have ever transacted on within your wallet or from or to your wallet is traceable throughout the history of it. Every single blockchain, because of the way blockchains work, you can trace that back to its genesis. So you can see where it started, and you can trace it all through the blockchain of where it's gone. So it's been said that Bitcoin is anonymous. It's not entirely anonymous. It's more synonymous or pseudonymous. It's pseudo-anonymous, in other words. So you can trace it. Law enforcement has been able to develop tools that can track Bitcoins through the Bitcoin network and put criminals that have thieves in prison because you have a perfect record of the transactional history on a blockchain.
But it's important to mention that law enforcement professionals aren't coming up with that. One of the emerging fields where people are actually making money with blockchain is blockchain analytics and blockchain forensics. So companies are out there contracting for law enforcement agencies because they know how to interact with the blockchain and how to trace transactions in a very elaborate manner. If you're someone who gets involved in illicit activities, I strongly encourage you to run away from Bitcoin. But that's one of the skill sets that if somebody's looking for a way to get involved, be indexing the blockchain and figuring out how to extrapolate, extract data.
For sure. Great question. Have one over there.
My name is German, and you guys mentioned that the most successful uses of blockchain have been tied to like transactions or like incentivized by money. But how are we going to reach like the other things that we want to like incorporate with blockchain without the incentive of money or tied to like currency? So like, could you address that?
Yeah, so that is one of the problems that the more permission chains have. They don't use some kind of incentive token. You don't need it because you have all the network participants wanting to use that platform. But again, how do you secure that, right? Now you have to trust, you introduce this trust to these entities that are kind of guiding that blockchain along. So without the incentive mechanism, it becomes a little bit more tricky if you're trying to decentralize. If you're not trying to decentralize, who cares, right? So it depends on what you're trying to do. It depends on what kind of use case and what kind of problems you're trying to solve. Sometimes it makes sense to have a token that incentivizes certain behavior and you reward that behavior with this token. That's why you see a huge explosion last year of ICOs happening, because now everybody's trying to solve these problems and tokenize everything. Of course, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for everything. It's not a solution to everything.
And when you take away that consensus mechanism or that incentive to participate in the network, you do run into problems. It's part of the problem of what's happening right now, even with Hyperledger. Hyperledger just landed a huge contract with Maersk, the big shipping company, and I just read that they're having problems getting people to participate in the network. Well, that's because there's no incentive to participate in the network other than the main centralized company saying you have to participate in this network. Same thing with Walmart. Walmart has a IBM Hyperledger project as well for food safety, which is fantastic, and blockchain works very well as far as tracing food back. They can, where it used to take, there was like a salmonella outbreak on lettuce, and it closed down our spinach, and it closed down the spinach industry for a month while they tried to trace back this spinach. On blockchain, if everybody's contributing to that blockchain, they can trace it in seconds, and so it can really improve efficiencies, especially like in supply chain for food safety, because you can trace back to exactly where that problem happened. But Walmart's having the same problem. They're demanding that all of their suppliers participate in this system, in this ledger. That's fine, but you have to have somebody at the helm going, no, you must participate in this in order for this to function. Whereas where there's an incentive, to participate in the network, like a native token, that's the incentive to participate in the network. So it's an interesting challenge, and these are things that we're developing and learning as we go along.
I'm really trying to answer that in a different way. Like, when will we get there? Very simply, when we have user and merchant adoption that drives it, right? Because we don't know exactly when that's going to come about or how it's going to come about. Just like Mr. Governor was saying in his presentation. But to give an example of where we need to be, most people don't even know that right now you can save 5% off the bat on anything on Amazon by using Bitcoin. You could probably say, I know you can save 50% because that's the target I always go for. A lot of people are saying you can save 30 or 40% through a website called purse.io. And we're always promoting that because it's super cool that you can save anywhere, like guaranteed 5, up to 40% on any Amazon purchase just by using Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. And once we get to a certain level of user adoption, Amazon's going to see that, and they're going to corner that. They're going to say, okay, we're going to figure out a way to monetize this ourselves. But that will be driven by user growth. And
no, I was just going to say, I mean, my initial interest in cryptocurrency, I thought it was absolutely crazy the first time I heard it. But my background's in e-commerce. So I was an e-commerce analyst for HSN, Home Shopping Network, at the time, the very first time I ever heard about it. And I thought it was absolutely nuts. But then over time, I started thinking about the quickness in payment processing. We have an online arcade. I thought about some of the ways we could use tokens in our arcade. So there was, my interest in it had really nothing to do with anything other than how we could apply it to e-commerce and payment processing. So those things still exist. Those things are still like interesting use cases. And like we've just been talking about, all of these things are so new. That's why I said at the very beginning, if you're into this and you're studying it, and there's so many resources online now. And when we all got into it, there was nothing. You couldn't find anybody even really to talk to. So there's so many resources now, and we have people that have come into our space for a free meetup. And then taken developer courses online, whether it be Solidity or whatever, that's actually now literally working on projects in our space, developing prototypes. So you have the opportunity to be as savvy and as educated as anybody else in this space. It's very, very new. So take it upon yourself. There's lots of resources out there, and we'd love to see you in Tampa.
We are one resource. So if you visit, we set up a promo code for everyone here.
Yep.
If you visit blockspaces.io and join our basic block membership, put in the promo code UF Blockchain, and you'll have free membership by us. So thank you all for coming. We'll stick around to answer questions, some more questions later on.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys.
So the next speaker we have coming up, we're going to introduce from you all.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me? Great. So we're learning about blockchain history, but a little bit of Florida Blockchain Club history. So DM had the opening remarks, and when I found the club, it was DM for the people, just like posted up in a room in Turlington with some pizza, and said, hey, this is great, but this is really underground. Let's make this official. Let's become a club through the rights union. That's what I was able to do. That was a really great accomplishment. One of the trips we made in one of the conferences, we saw a panel, and that's the first time I met Perry Ann, and she's the next speaker. I told her, hey, great panel, we'd love to have you come and speak at one of our clubs. And when I told her that I was from the University of Florida, she's like, oh, you're talking to me because I'm a Gator. I was like, I had no idea. So that was awesome. Last year, this time, she came and she partook in the tailgate, and now at the tailgate, that's where this was born, the idea of the Florida Blockchain Conference. Perry Ann is the founder and the president of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, and I'm really happy and excited to introduce her. So, without further ado.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So, when I was a little girl from Lakeland, Florida, what I wanted to be when I grew up was a Gator. That's all I knew. My entire life goal was to go to the University of Florida. I achieved that goal when I was about 18 years old, when I was accepted, and came here for the first day of my freshman year, and I remember walking through campus kind of nostalgic, like, okay, life has been accomplished, what next? I had no idea what journey I would be walking into after that. The reason why I wanted to go to the University of Florida is because it is the best school, arguably, in the world. Certainly,
Yes.
in the state of Florida. It is in the top 10 in the nation. But it's really the opportunity that comes from this community. The brightest, the most talented people come out of this school. And as I've been in the workforce since graduating, I've met so many great University of Florida alumni. Many of them are here with us today, so I want to thank all of those who have come to join us to support the club, Carl, Alex, David, many others. And as I've kind of moved on into my professional career, I run into people from the University of Florida all the time. You just never know who your classmate is going to be 10 years from now, or the friends that you make today, what they'll grow up to become through their careers. It's always really impressive, and it's always been just so exciting to see where everybody ends up. So when I was here, I graduated class of 2010 as an economics major. So I was studying economics at UF during the historic financial crisis of 2006, 2007, 2008 timeline. It was somewhat of a difficult moment for me and a lot of my classmates, because Florida was really one of the states that was hardest hit by the economic downturn, because so much of our economy here is built on real estate. There wasn't anybody that I knew that was not impacted by what was going on between Washington and Wall Street. So my classmates and I really were pushing our professors to get real answers to what was happening to our community and to our families and our friends. And they didn't have a lot of answers for us at the time because a lot of the traditional economics way of teaching is not necessarily focused around the policy. And so what I learned through that process, through kind of my own independent study while I was still here on campus, was quite scary and devastating. Our country is facing just a huge amount of debt. How could we be racking up so much debt per capita, and how is that all being strapped on my generation as we're walking into the workforce within the next couple of years? And then learning about the issues of just general ethics and transparency broadly through the financial services industry was really tough to swallow. So I dedicated my career at a young age to working in public policy and fighting for a better future for my generation and for those that will come after me. So that led to moving to Washington, D.C., where I've been living ever since. I did my internship at the White House, the National Economic Council, which was fascinating because part of my internship was tracking all the TARP stimulus funds. So not only was I somewhat upset about what was happening, having to track all the money that we were bailing out these institutions, which was not a decision that I supported, was also something that was hard to swallow. And so from that, I went to Congress and I worked in the U.S. House of Representatives as an economic analyst advising on finance and economic related issues. And the highlight of my work on Capitol Hill, as you all may know, the chairman of the Fed, or chairwoman, twice a year, she always comes and testifies in front of Congress. This was one of the only opportunities that we get to hear statements from the chairperson of the Fed. And my job was to help write all those questions for the congressman. So I would spend weeks and months preparing for those moments. Super nerdy thing to do, but I really enjoyed that. To really start getting down to the bottom of what was happening around policy. In that process, I learned about this digital currency called Bitcoin. I was just briefed on it as this kind of new and emerging technology, something they brought to the committee to bring to our attention. They didn't really spend a lot of time on it. It never ended up making its way into the legislation that we were working on, which now is the Jobs Act. And as someone who, as an economist working in monetary policy, this idea that there's a currency out there that was not controlled by either a government or a corporation or a small group of people was just a really fascinating idea. So I started studying what this Bitcoin concept was, and which turned into somewhat of an obsession. It was hard to put it down. I just started digging into the rabbit hole. For those of you who have been in the rabbit hole and are still trying to get out of it. Over the years, I just came to the conclusion that this is the most important technology I will ever see in my entire lifetime, and I have to dedicate everything I have to it. And that's where we came up with the concept of the Chamber of Digital Commerce. So, same issue here. Try this again. Are you going to advance the slide, please? So the Chamber of Digital Commerce, we have grown into the world's largest trade association representing the blockchain industry. We represent over 200 companies that are investing in and innovating in blockchain and digital assets. As someone who was working on the public policy kind of on the other side of the table for several years, it became quite obvious that government, regulation, regulatory uncertainty, compliance, those types of legal issues are one of the biggest areas to the adoption of blockchain. Okay, so in kind of the early years of crypto, so like 2012, 2013 timeline, there were a lot of major scandals that hit the industry, from Silk Road, Mt. Gox, Liberty Reserve. We're still recovering from these issues today, really big black eyes to our community. And in DC, congressmen, politicians, the regulators, really the only thing that they knew about blockchain or Bitcoin is that people were using it to buy illegal drugs online. They had no idea that companies all over the world were investing significant resources into much more interesting use cases for the technology. So a big piece of what we do is helping promote and advance blockchain through policy circles. We believe that any asset, tangible or intangible, can be tokenized, recorded, tracked, and traded on the blockchain. And this can enable many transactions to be cheaper, faster, and more secure than ever before. So why do we need blockchain? It's a question that we're constantly asked and pressed upon. The case is really simple, and the need for this technology is easy to understand when we look at what's happening around us every single day in the cyber world. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, there's been over $6 trillion worth of cyber attacks. That's what it will cost our global economy by the year 2022. Just last year, the cost of cyber attacks was over $600 billion. And last year, we spent over $100 billion on cybersecurity. Most of us have been the subject of some type of identity theft or cybercrime. I posted these 3 examples, not to poke fun or to single anybody in this industry. For our companies at the Chamber of Digital Commerce, one of the biggest complaints that we get is the need for talent. Everybody is hiring, but there's not enough talent to fill all the roles that are available. Very few people have the skills to work in this space, which is one of the reasons that I really felt the University of Florida would be a great place for the industry to invest resources in this event and other opportunities, because UF has, one, it's a great school, it's huge, and there's a huge focus on science and technology here. So one of the projects that I wanted to highlight at the Chamber is our work around tokens. Just this past summer, we published a white paper called Understanding Digital Tokens. I'm going to share some of the highlights from this report, but really the paper, the project behind it, was about building guidelines for this industry. So in a moment in time when there's very little regulatory clarity or regulatory certainty for this industry, what we did is we brought a lot of different stakeholders, brought them together to write best practices and guidelines for digital assets and tokens today. This was really quite an impressive feat because a lot of times this industry has a hard time communicating and working together. There's a lot of challenges where the community's been divided, especially on technical issues around scaling and interoperability. So being able to bring in the Token Alliance, we brought over 400 participants globally and agreed on guiding principles. And that also included 20 law firms. We had 20 law firms that signed off on these principles. This concept of token sales or token issuances or initial coin offerings, probably one of the most highly contested areas of law today. I don't know if anyone in the history of law has ever been able to get 20 law firms to ever sign off on anything. We did it with the Token Alliance. In this group, we really wanted to approach this as a way that would be palatable for government to benefit from this work product. So we brought in 2 former regulators to help us, including Paul Atkins, who's a former commissioner of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and Dr. Jim Newsom, who's also a UF alum, but who's the former chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. With this group, there's also token issuers, technologists, economists, different types of companies. We even have banks, traditional exchanges like NASDAQ, CME were involved in this report around the guidelines that we issued. The first part of the report was a regulatory overview, so it was really just an educational resource on what are all of the different laws that can impact tokenization. I'll highlight some of those in the later slide. We covered 5 countries: the United States, Canada, Australia, the UK, and Gibraltar. Second was the guidelines. So these were around token sponsors and token trading platforms for utility tokens or non-security or non-commodity tokens. The reason being is because utility tokens are having the most trouble being recognized in law. They're really fighting to be recognized. And then the third is the token landscape with some economic data about how big this ecosystem is and what it really looks like. So there's been over $20 billion raised to date through initial coin offerings or token issuances. This is a chart that was put together by one of our members, Snowy Crown. Again, it's highlighted in that report. You can see this idea of an ICO really started to play out in 2013. There were a few that raised small amounts of money in over a couple of years, but all that activity just happened within the past 24 months. So a significant uptake. Part of that activity is really interesting. A lot of great technology, a lot of great ideas, a lot of very interesting innovation. Some of it was very concerning. We have seen bad actors come in and abuse this technology for nefarious purposes. Again, that makes our job working with policymakers more difficult because if there's illegal activity happening and you're asking for more, a regulatory-friendly approach, that makes that conversation a lot more difficult to have. So by bringing the industry together to determine how do we delineate the good from the bad, the garbage from the real, That's what these guidelines were meant to do, without having regulators do that job for us. This is another graph that shows kind of a breakdown in the funding. And again, you can see it's the idea was tested over the first couple of years and then really took off just recently. And now we're seeing kind of a slowdown. We're seeing a huge kind of drop off in ICOs, which in much is a result of enforcement actions that have come from the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is just kind of a graph of some of the different types of token projects that we have seen. There's many different use cases for blockchain and tokenized models. Everything from asset management to exchanges to healthcare, prediction markets, identity, you name it, there's probably some type of blockchain application for it. A key part of the tokenized networks are the secondary markets. So most of these tokens are also trading on exchanges. The total market cap of the blockchain and token ecosystem today is about $200 billion. However, while that number may seem large, and you compare it to global financial assets, it represents less than 0.3%, and also less than 1% of global GDP. However, those numbers are growing. Okay, so breaking down tokens, there's many different types of tokens. One kind of mistake that we've seen a lot of people make, especially policymakers, is just kind of looping everything into one category, kind of similar to Bitcoin. We saw some illegal use cases, again, going back to Silk Road. People really didn't understand people were using this technology for much more interesting things. It's not all about these kind of French cases. There's two types of assets that can be tokenized. You have a blockchain-based asset, so that's an asset that solely exists on a blockchain, like Bitcoin or Ethereum. And then you can also have a tokenized asset. So this is an asset that is represented in the real world. So think about tokenized gold or any other commodity and having that being represented by a token digitally on a blockchain. So of the different tokens that we see, we really break it down into 5 different categories. The first is a utility token. This is a token that has utility, a security, and can have a mix of all of those in between a commodity or a currency. Again, on the left side, you have the 2 different types of assets, which I went through, and then kind of breaking down these different definitions. So a utility token is something that can give you access to a tokenized network or a piece of software. So you can think about it as instead of, we're issuing a token and we're using that to raise money, which is kind of what the concept of an initial coin offering is, that token gives you access to a software product and it has utility within that program. A security would meet the criteria of an investment contract. Again, that would be a financing model, not a software model. A commodity would meet the definition of a commodity under the Commodity and Exchange Act. Those are regulated by the CFTC. Currency, a medium of exchange, unit of account or sort of value. So Bitcoin was initially introduced as a peer-to-peer electronic currency, and then they can take combinations of all of the above. In terms of how a new token is born, this is what we call token generation about. How can a token be brought about? We see 3 common methods. You have a direct issuance, or a sponsor of the tokens. Sometimes we call these token sales, sometimes we call them initial coin offerings. We don't really like the term ICO because it implies IPO, and we're trying to advocate that these not always should fit within the securities laws. You also have airdrops, where you really just give out tokens to a community. There's the mining process. Depending on how the tokens are issued, will greatly impact how regulators may try to define them. So talking about regulation. It's really about as clear as mud what regulations apply and when and where, which makes it very complicated, burdensome, and risky to deploy tokenized models today. There's really 2 different types of ways countries are looking at token sales and ICOs. One is depending on the facts and circumstances of a particular project and applying the laws to that. The other is an outright ban, which we've seen in China and South Korea. Just in the United States, there's many different federal agencies that all are clamoring for jurisdiction. There's also many states that are looking. to regulate this industry. And regulators are also looking at marketing products. So the way in which you talk about the product, either on social media or to your investors, or even just on your website, can elect regulatory scrutiny on your project. So starting at the federal level, the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, has determined that convertible virtual currencies, so these assets, these tokenized assets, can be considered a commodity, and they are regulating them as commodities. The SEC is looking at them as security. FinCEN regulates money laundering. They determined in 2013 that convertible virtual currencies such as Bitcoin and others will be regulated as currencies. And then IRS, which is our taxing authority, has determined they would be taxed as property. Of note, both FinCEN and IRS are part of the Department of the Treasury, so they're literally part of the same group. They took completely different stances. And then you have CFTC and SEC. So between a commodity, a currency, a security, or property, it's kind of anybody's guess how to navigate through these regulatory waters. And because of this regulatory uncertainty in the United States, it's really causing a slowdown in innovation here. This is a graph, again, put together by Smith and Crown about where the funding for tokenized networks are coming from. The Caribbean obviously takes the cake. That blue line represents money from the Caribbean that's been invested into foreign products. So a lot of money in the Caribbean that's going into products and projects overseas. That trend reverses in the United States, where there's a lot of US money that's being invested into US-based projects. But there's not a lot of US money that's being invested into foreign products. The reason why that is because foreign entrepreneurs, foreign companies, foreign projects, they're not sure what the laws are in the United States, so they're just saying, we're not going to open this up to the US. There's also all sorts of companies overseas that are not allowing people in the United States to use their products and services. So we're literally being cut out of the system due to the regulatory uncertainty. And the data speaks for that. So our Token Alliance, our paper was released in July of this year, and we will be updating it. So the first report was around utility tokens, so it's one very small asset of the token ecosystem. Our next paper is going to be focused on security tokens, as well as the AML regulations around tokens, cybersecurity, and also consumer protections. And then we'll also be adding regulatory overviews from many different jurisdictions around the world. So we invite all those who are interested in experimenting and contributing to the blockchain space to be a part of the Chamber and our Token Alliance. We have 5 different working groups at the Chamber. The Token Alliance is one. We also have many others. It's been, we have quite a prolific platform underway. And I guess my time is up. Again, it's really a pleasure to be back at my alma mater, speaking blockchain and meeting with you all. I will be here throughout the weekend, tomorrow at the tailgate, Gator tonight, and the football game tomorrow afternoon. Look forward to working with each of you and having you guys experimenting with us in this exciting technological frontier.
Thank you, Carrie Ann. Do you mind if I get the clicker? Alrighty guys, we're going to keep it moving. Next up we got David Deputy, and he's going to be talking a little bit about tax implications on all of these applications for blockchain and crypto.
Robbie, tailgate.
Oh, also, for anyone that isn't able to stay till the end, tomorrow we're going to be having a tailgate outside of Library West, and the Facebook event page should be posted. So we hope to have everyone there.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So when I was a little boy growing up in the same place, Lakeland, Florida, a lot of us from Lakeland, I also wanted to be a Gator and achieve that. I was here at a different time, a little older than Mary Ann, you wouldn't know it, right? I got out in 1987. I will say that during that 4-year stretch with Emmett Smith here, we never lost our home game, guys. Can you imagine? It was amazing. Won the SEC only once. Should have worked harder. Anyway, so it was a great time to be a Gator. Still a great time to be a Gator. I can't explain how happy I am to be back on campus. So I got out, and it was a recession. It wasn't a good time to graduate, 1987. And what was happening was there was what's called a savings and loan crisis. And the banks, specific sector banks, the savings and loan community, had overextended themselves, invested in various risky assets. There was some fraud. You may have heard of this whitewater thing, which still taints certain political people. So I took a job up in Atlanta, working for the Federal Home Loan Bank, and got firsthand experience with some of the good and the bad of the financial services industry as a regulator. So it was a great trial by fire, but I came out of that experience really understanding. I used to use a mainframe computer. I'd go down to a PC and I'd analyze the information and end up writing macros that did it, boom, boom. It would do it, like pushing a button. So I realized the power of technology for transparency. And I went on through various roles, one of which was to start a company called Trust.net out in San Francisco. And it was a digital currency company. It wasn't the peer-to-peer, great ideas of Satoshi Nakamoto. It was leveraging the ACH network for gift giving, essentially, think of online virtual debit cards. What happened was another company called Flues launched ahead of us, and within a week, we were all upset because we're like, oh, they got out in front of us. Within a week, they were hacked, and the Russians took $50 million, their entire asset base. And so when you think about Russian hacking now, it's like history doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. So my experience was that when I first heard about Bitcoin, I'm like, that won't work, somebody's going to hack it. And then I saw a video of a woman, she was in what's called the Organization of Economic Development and Cooperation, which is a multi-governmental organization of policymakers. And I saw a video of her, and during the video, I watched her have emotional reaction to Bitcoin. They're like, what are these Bitcoin people? It's like anarchy. Do they think they can create their own money? And I was trained that when you see people with strong emotional reactions, to dig in and try to understand what caused that. And so I decided to go to a blockchain conference. And I thought, having been in San Francisco for many years, it was a conference in New York, I thought it was going to be a developers conference. I thought it was going to be flip-flops and tie-dye t-shirts and kind of the things I had seen in San Francisco. I walked in it was in New York at the Hyatt or the Marriott. I walked in and up on stage was the executive VP of IBM with Blythe Masters, who had created the collateralized derivative securities market. There were these very senior, seasoned bank and technology executives. And I'm like, whoa, this is not what I expected. And this was back in 2015, 14 later. It was the first what's called a consensus conference in New York City. And so I went home and spent the weekend trying to understand what was going on. And lo and behold, I went down that rabbit hole that you've heard about. And I really recommend if it's a rainy weekend, go down the rabbit hole, because that's what it takes. It takes about 48 hours of very little sleep to understand what's going on. So after that, I devoted myself to this industry. I worked for a company called Vertex, and what we do is we try to get to frictionless commerce. So we process transactions, every purchase and every sale that you make for Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, Disney, Walmart, Target, you name it, we do it, right? They send us their transaction details. We look up within the US, there's 5,000 different jurisdictions that all make up their own sales tax rules. So we do that for the US, we do it for 129 countries. We have this big database with all this regulatory information, and we say you're buying a sugary soda in Philadelphia, well, guess what? There's a soda tax, right? So we do that, and we put it on the invoices. So we're involved in the nature of taxation. I also serve as the president of what's called the Accounting Blockchain Coalition. And it's like the slides missing. Anyway, the Accounting Blockchain Coalition is a nonprofit group where we focus on educating the accounting and tax professionals within the industry. So we collaborate as a community. The gap between the pace of technology and the pace of knowledge in the accounting industry is only getting further and further. There's very few accountants who know how to do an audit of crypto assets, how to interrogate a Merkle tree to understand if the asset is really there. Does anybody in the room know how to do that? Right? I don't. Right? It's not easy. Those are the skills that future accountants are going to need. And they're nervous. They're looking at AI, they're looking at robotic process automation, they're looking at blockchain, and they're all wondering, whether their skills are going to be fit for market. It's akin to the emergence of spreadsheet back in the day, right? The Lotus 1-2-3 and Excel that came out. They changed the way they work. This is going to change the way they work. So we banded together. We've got 35 organizations, Big Four. We got the professors from the academic community. We coordinate with what's called the American Accounting Association. So we've got 25 professors participating with us. And I'm here looking to bring the student side into our educational organization, the business students, the accountants, so those are considered roles in tax. I'm also a proud member of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, my company has been for a while. We participate in the Token Alliance and other work groups there. Been a great relationship. Perry Ann and I, we're different generations, so we didn't know each other back at Lakeland, but I'm sure we would have been great friends if we had. Finally, the Government Blockchain Association, I'm a member of that. So my role is really to have one foot on the government side and one foot on the corporate side to help the government take advantage of this opportunity to create frictionless commerce in a way that reduces the cost and complexity on both sides. So really, in my world, the government drives it. There are innovations on the corporate side that can inform the government, but ultimately the government's going to be the one who's going to say, pay your taxes using the blockchain, right? And it can have a big impact. We can get rid of tax returns. We can get rid of the role of the corporation serving as the middleman between the consumer who's paying the sales tax and the government who's collecting it, right? Corporations, it's not their tax, right? They're just passing it through. So things like that are on the horizon. But let me back up a little bit real quickly. Anybody know what this is? Anybody read your recent New York Times bestseller? Okay, so 5,000 years ago in ancient Sumeria, they invented writing. And what was the first thing they decided to write? Did they write love poems? Did they record the ancestry of the king? No. This is a ledger. This is actually a tax ledger. So what's the first thing they wrote? They wrote down how much tax was owed. And this is what this says. I think it's like 29,086 bushels of wheat collected over 37 months. And it's signed by somebody named Kushin. Well, that looks a lot like a transaction in Bitcoin or any of the other. So you've got a number, right? You've got some representative, a timestamp or date, and you've got a signature. So if you think about the emergence of blockchain, it goes way back to recording what's been important to the development of civilization, and the first thing we therefore wrote. So we're looking at this decentralized global computer worldwide ability to store this information down. Isn't that a great world? Problem is, I'll tell you a story. So back in the UK, they had a system where if I needed to say, I wanted to buy that cow from you, but I didn't have the money. Well, you would say, okay, we'll do it on credit. And the credit was a stick. It's called a tally stick. You can Google it and see pictures of it. What they would do is they would notch the stick, and one cow would be 5 notches, and we would break the stick in half. It was more like a board. And the splinter pattern is unique. You would keep half, I would keep half, your half, right? It was a debt. My half was an asset, right? It was small communities, they knew each other. So mine was actually money. I could take it, I could trade it for a goat, right? And someone would accept it. So the monetary system, to some extent, other than the silver coins they had, the pounds, was denominated in sticks. That's what they used for money. And they were called tally sticks. And whenever you paid me, then we would take the sticks and we would burn them, and we would extinguish the debt. The term still used today. So the Bank of England, created by the powers that be in London, they decided they're going to collect all the sticks and get rid of them, because we're going to issue debt from the Bank of England. And so it takes them 17 years because people don't want to give up their sticks. And finally they collect it all and they pat themselves on the back, all the politicians and bankers, and they have a big party in the Parliament building and they say, burn the sticks. So they take them down to the basement, and they throw them in the furnace, and they burn down the House of Parliament. Burnt it to the ground, 1837. So when you go over London Bridge, look to your left. That's not the original Parliament building. That's one that was rebuilt after they burned it down when they celebrated the change of how they were going to do debt and money supply. Okay, so be careful. So that's the way the regulators think about it. Be careful about what's going to happen. So Perry Ann kind of covered some of this. I want to just make it real clear about the mind of the regulator. So what's challenging here? Well, the characterization, she went through the different classes of tokens. It's really hard because not only are they different, each jurisdiction has different rules. In the US, it's called the Howey test. And so that basically, I think it was an orange grove originally, maybe around here, where somebody invested in an orange grove. And the test basically, the legal test basically says, is there an expectation of profits that's been put forth by the person receiving the money, the funder, based on the efforts of others. So this test is one of the legal tests that says if there is, well, then it's a security. I don't care if it's orange grows, I don't care what it is. If it's token, I don't really care. Well, it's different. In Canada, they have a different standard. In the UK, they have different standards. So there are these legal standards, and it requires lawyers to work through these legal standards. So that's a lot of human effort, and on a case-by-case basis, and there's case law in it. So there's all this body of law and regulatory policy around how to classify these things, and that's just the characterization. So once you figured out what it is, then you got to figure out where it is. These distributed, it used to be, for example, you would look where the server is. And then cloud computing came along, and that kind of, you don't really know where your data is anymore. And now with these distributed systems, you really don't know where it is, where the activity is taking place, so that the jurisdiction can say, that activity is within my jurisdiction, I therefore get to tax it, regulate it, whatever it is they want to do with it. Right? And then finally, who is it? So sometimes it depends upon who's transacting. Right? In my world, it's the ship to, ship from, sell to, sell from. Those are the 4 fields that we look at. And the rules, sometimes you use ship to, sometimes you use sell to. So, right? There's all these rules that have been built up based on the expectation of the presence of that information, which is no longer there. Because these pseudo-anonymous accounts, in many cases, can't be tracked to an individual. And that individual, if it could be, their jurisdiction might not be known. And then finally, timing. When is it? Well, you can see it happen on the transaction execution. But when I think of timing, I think of these tokens can change form. No one's ever seen that. So there's this thing called the Simple Agreement for Future Tokens, the SAFTI agreement. And what that says is we're going to raise some money, but as soon as we issue and go live, then it's not going to be a security anymore. It's going to be basically a good or service, tangible good and service. So you're under securities regs, maybe you raise it, and all of a sudden you launch, and now you're looking at other regulations, tax and other ones. Okay, so these things morph and they change. So regulators have never seen this kind of stuff, right? And what they want is they really just want a single throat to choke. So I had the opportunity to advise governmental organizations. I was at the OECD, and I was talking to the WCO and the Inter-American Development Bank all within the last 3 weeks, and they really want a single throat to choke. The conversation with the OECD is around platforms for e-commerce. Right? E-commerce has been around a long time. They're just catching up. The regulators are just now catching up with e-commerce. That's how slow they move. And this is soft law. This is not even real rules. They just make recommendations that have to be implemented into national law. So that's how slow the regulators move against these technologies that are exponential. And they're saying, well, maybe we'll just go after the platforms. Maybe we'll go after the Amazons and eBays, and we'll grab them by the throat. And, that's how we'll do e-commerce, as an example. So that's what they're thinking about. It just tells you how slow the regulators move. And my favorite picture, willful disregard for regulation. So you've got this regulatory community that's looking for this information so they can understand how to treat the regulations. They're looking for a single throat to choke. And unfortunately, we had some bad actors come in over the last 2 years, right? And so people got very rich and flaunted that wealth and claimed they were global citizens and their companies are decentralized, so you can't touch me. Now, you've spent your career as a regulator. You're very proud of the work you've done, bringing safety and security to widows and orphans, or raising revenues to fund the commons, whatever your role has been. How do you think you react to that? Probably the same way I react as a parent if that was my child. Not very well. Let's just say that. Okay, so the regulators are coming, the regulators are coming. I felt like Paul Revere over the last 3 years carrying them, right through the villages to the crypto community going, the regulators are coming, the regulators are coming. They're like, oh yeah, go away. Right? Well, they're here now. So subpoenas are going out. Regulations are being formed around the space. Okay, so we talked about how long it takes. So e-commerce snuck up on the regulators. right? Regulators were asleep at the switch, and all of a sudden, all the nations in the world are going, oh my gosh, we got to do something about e-commerce. I'm losing all this revenue, and these bad companies are selling cross-border, and they don't have any physical presence here. I can't regulate them. I can't. Bad stuff's coming. The customs guys are going, wow, thousands, millions of small packages flowing, physical packages flowing across my border based on digital purchases happening somewhere else. What do I do? What do I do? Well, they're not going to let it happen again. So they're talking about getting ahead of this. And regulators are actually pretty smart. You think, the government's 9-to-5s aren't on top of things. They're very much on top of things. They have some real challenges in trying to figure it out. So they're basically not going to let digital assets sneak up on them, and they're actively pursuing regulatory policies across the range of areas. So, what's happening is, if you look on the left, right, the cryptocurrencies versus the internet. If you look at the cryptocurrency user growth versus the internet user growth, looks very similar, right? So they realized this is another round of what we saw. We were asleep at the switch in the first round. Let's get ahead of this, at least at the intergovernmental policy level. I can't speak for various national jurisdictions, but that's what I'm hearing. Okay, and e-commerce, we're looking at about an $80 trillion economy this year. There's about $3 trillion in e-commerce. So that gives you a sense. It got up to about, 4% of the economic impact in their nations, and they're like, wow, we should have been on it when it was 1%. Because now, this thing's growing fast, and we've still got this regulatory process to go through, which involves bringing a lot of stakeholders together and trying to get consensus. And there is no consensus on what to do around e-commerce, just as an example. So it's a long process, and they want to get ahead of it. Okay. Digital assets, Perry already covered, 200 billion. All assets about 300 trillion. So it's a drop in the bucket on a value basis. It's a drop in the bucket still on a transaction basis. But just know that they've learned. They've learned that they can't wait until it's painful in order to act. And they're trying to figure out how to act. They don't know what to do yet, but they're engaging with the community in a way that we haven't seen in the past, which is good for all of us. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop. I could go on and on about the tax side. Let me just say this. Our focus at the Accounting Blockchain Coalition is education. It's education around two different areas. One is the emergence of the digital asset class. So we have different working committees. We have an audit working committee, an internal controls working committee, a tax working committee, and a regulatory working committee. And these working committees are where the real action takes place. And so this new asset class challenges the accountants, for example. The accountants are, in the audit area, they are responsible for helping ensure the integrity and the assurance of the financial statements that are provided to investors, right? That can be challenging when there's digital assets on those financial statements. Let me just give you an example that we come across. Let's say you claim you have some Bitcoin. I can go and I can see the Bitcoin in the account. Okay, great. Now, can you prove to me that you have the private keys to access that account? And you tell me, no, I don't want to touch those private keys because they're locked up in cold storage, and it's a security risk to touch those private keys and actually put them to use. But I want you to send a small transaction to prove to me, that you actually have access. So proof of existence, different than proof of ability to access and utilize. And both of those are important tests to make sure it stays on the balance sheet. Otherwise, we've got to write it off. You got to give your qualified opinion. But there's risk there that you can't vouch for it. That's just one example of a myriad of issues in the accounting industry that we're addressing. On the tax side, brings up the other area. So there's this emergence of the digital asset class. There's also the use of this technology within these industries to make things more efficient, to make things better, to reduce the cost, increase the speed, provide greater trust. So the governments are starting to experiment with how this technology can be used, for example, in the tax realm. So as we process transactions, for example, we're looking at, wow, what would the world look like if Vertex, the company I work for, was disintermediated? right? Because what we do is we collect the government regulations, we collect public information, put it in a database, we combine it with business transactions, and we compute the tax. That's our business, right? Well, what if the governments decide to put all those regulations into a blockchain-based system that is shared with everyone? And what if the computations on those systems can be done under what's called trusted execution frameworks, which have now come out, you Google it from Microsoft and others, so that you can be assured that the right computation was done. It's got a digital stamp, a certificate of assurance. That's the auditors, right? You don't need the auditors. You get a digital audit taking place in real time to certify the use and the controls around the system. What does it do to our business? So, just to stay alive, we're getting ahead of the game. So we're saying, well, okay, so there's a bunch of different blockchains out there. Governments are probably not going to all coordinate and say, let's all use Hyperledger, or let's all use Ethereum. They're going to each choose their own blockchain. So, corporations are going to be put in a position of a lot of different standards they have to deal with. Governments probably aren't going to have the capability to take their regulations and encode them into smart contracts. So it sounds like maybe some good opportunities for us. So we're evolving. And I think that's the key point I'd like to make, is that these changes require you to rethink your business models and to understand how you can perhaps accommodate the new reality that we all know is coming. It's a matter of how fast. It may be 20 years before this happens, but it may be 5, because nobody thought that sleeping on an air mattress in somebody's spare bedroom or taking a ride with a total stranger would become big businesses, but they have. So it's the experimental economy. We don't know what's going to work. I lead about 25-person incubation unit within the organization to try to understand what bets we need to place today on plausible futures that could occur tomorrow. So that's what I would advise. I've got about 3 minutes left. See if there's any questions. Here, please.
Yeah, so just a question comes to mind is, testing. The question comes to mind is, isn't there a fundamental conflict of interest between regulators who want to collect tax and then folks that came from the public permissionless anarchist viewpoint where it's let's circumvent the government and transact between ourselves?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Yeah, so I wrote an article along with a guy, Griffin Anderson from Consensus, who runs a company called Balance 3, and Consensus is an integrator in the investment portfolio. So he's more on the income tax side and more on the transaction side. And then there's a researcher from Singapore University. And basically what the paper says is that we need to offer the community the opportunity, but not the obligation, to invoke their transactions in a regulatory compliant manner. So what that would look like would be a de-risking of an investment for a venture capitalist. So you've got a lot of risk if these businesses are running around the world operating unregulated. I mean, if the liability could go from them, they shut down them, and they accrue it to you. I mean, that's not outside the realm of possibility. You're running one of these startups, well, you're going to want to, run your business in a regulatory compliant way. The Chinese and the Koreans, they'll go snatch you out of your hotel and throw you in jail. They don't have any problem with that, right? There's not always due process in the world, so be careful where you speak at conferences. So we believe that the frameworks will emerge, as Christine Lagarde of the IMF said, to use blockchain to regulate blockchain. Blockchain is the perfect regulatory platform. So these regulators, with auditors perhaps contributing, can put up regulatory nodes and watch the transactions occur. And frameworks can be built such that you can look at a whitelist to see if someone has already been KYC'd. So you already know that your customer information has been done, right? You could look and check their reputation. You could look at their connections in previous transactions to see if there's a money laundering risk, a risk score. You could characterize the token using AI, for example. And you could see, okay, well, that token in that jurisdiction is classified this way, therefore it's a utility token, it's a taxable good, taxes due. So basically, there's lots of ways to use the technology itself to help build an option, but not an obligation, because we recognize the ability of cash to be used anonymously has a role in society, and we think it's a choice. We don't think any of the blockchains anyway would force everyone to be regulatory compliant. They probably wouldn't have many users. But there's the white blockchains, the black blockchains. basically what we said. And there's paths so that you can become white if you choose to. Yes? Mr. Governor.
Thanks for sharing. So my question is one of just, again, similar story to what I had. The barriers are culture. Okay? So when I was going to school here, and I went to the College of Business with computer science, we always joked with some of my friends that were in the school, the Fisher School of Accounting, because we would tell them, you're learning arithmetic, I'm learning computational sciences. Which one's better? But then, of course, my friends that had CPAs kind of went right and career-wise, went surpassed me, but then I caught up with them and surpassed them many years later with the IT education that I got. So my question to you is, who's going to teach the accountants of the future the engineering skills that they're going to need? AI, machine learning, computer vision, because this is not arithmetic. Well, everything you just, traversing a Merkle tree, that is not something that you're going to learn at the Fisher School of Accounting, at least today. No different than the way they're going to have to teach doctors how to do diagnosis using augmented intelligence. So what is going on in academia to alter the way and the course accountants are going to become accountants in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have more information in the legal realm. So certainly there are schools that are creating smart contract courses. A company called Open Law is working on, a lot of Rosa Law School in New York. We just spent a couple days with the American Accounting Association. That's the professors from all over the world. There were about 220 of them out in San Francisco. ABC came in, we collaborated, did a design thinking session together for 4 hours on those issues. And now we've got 25 of them who are collaborating with us. And really my intent here is to bring the students in and understand what do the students need. Because, design thinking, we need both personas. You can't just take other professors, force it down the students' throats. So I don't have an answer to that. We were formed to serve the industry. We're reaching out into the academic community because we think that the future industry leaders are coming up through the realms today. So we're working on it.
Work in process, I guess.
Yeah.
I would venture to guess there's not one accounting student in here. Right here. A couple, okay. But think about it. It's a ledger.
It's a ledger. It's accounting. Yes.
Your question is right, though.
I think my time's up. I'd be happy to talk to you after this. Thank you.
I already asked him. Or no, I asked.
Alrighty, guys. Next up, we have Alex Sonnerberg. So we're changing gears a little bit from pump the brakes on blockchain and crypto to actually experiencing making the money. So let's give it up for Alex.
I just drank a little coffee, but I'm gonna go.
Hey everyone, my name is Alex Sonnerberg. Like that nice introduction just said, I'm going to take this presentation a little more into the weeds. How do we actually analyze all the data in this asset class and derive any sort of investment thesis out of that? So real quick, I'm Alex. I went to UF. I graduated in 2013. I studied finance. I also minored in entrepreneurship because I absolutely love startups and idolize entrepreneurs. I also minored in real estate because I really like investing and modeling different sort of asset classes. My first job out of school was at Raymond James in St. Pete, the investment banking department. And thankfully in 2014, with two of my best friends from UF that were software engineers, we all decided to leave and start a startup in the crypto space. So Lawnmower, that middle logo, the initial iteration of it was actually basically investing your spare change into Bitcoin. So if you've heard of the app Acorns for stocks, we created that for cryptocurrencies. We actually ended up selling that company to a company called CoinDesk, which I hope a lot of you are familiar with, probably the biggest media company in the space. I worked there as a research analyst for about 8 months, mostly doing data analysis and writing research reports like the state of blockchain, if you've heard of it. And a little over a year ago, I started this new company with two guys I met in New York called Tetris Capital. The backgrounds of all those guys are mostly in investment banking as well. So when I got started in crypto in about 2013, the asset class was pretty much just Bitcoin. It was over 90% of the space, and the entire thing was less than $1 billion. The next 5 years, it felt like pretty slow, steady growth. But when you look at it now, almost nothing happened until about a year ago, where we just went into this mania. Now Bitcoin in 2018 at least comprised less than half of the asset class, and we had thousands of new tokens. So essentially this is what we're left with. I like to call it the resulting rainbow of tokens. Nowadays when I'm scrolling down CoinMarketCap, even as a full-time analyst, I feel like I see logos I've never seen before in my life. So basically the challenge is, how the heck do we filter this asset class and make it into any sort of thing we can start to work with and really analyze, which I'll go into shortly. Just to zoom in on the last 2 years though, 2017 and 18, this is the liquid asset class as well, so understand I'm not really talking about these early stage SaaS or equity type of deals here. But in 2017, we went up 46x globally in the crypto asset class. This year, we lost about 3/4 of that value. This is a really big downturn, but if you actually think about it, we're still up 12x from the start of 2017. We went up so much that this downturn still left us a healthy amount up. Really, if from 2017 to 2018 looked like that bottom arrow that took us to where we are today, people would probably be talking about this space a lot differently. The market just really got ahead of itself. So we can actually now see that in 2018, Bitcoin performed almost the best out of any asset and lost about 2/3 of its value. A lot of really big assets that a lot of people were pretty bullish on have lost over 90% in the last 9 months. So here we can kind of compare Bitcoin versus altcoins. Altcoins as a group meaning everything that's not Bitcoin. So there's a few things I want you to take away from this chart. The start of 2017, if you look at the thin green line and the percentages on the right, Bitcoin comprised about 90% of the asset class. In early 2018, when we saw this huge monster rally, so Bitcoin is the market cap in orange, altcoins are in blue. Altcoins blew past Bitcoin, took Bitcoin's dominance to the lowest point ever at about 30%. Now there's a few things I want you to take away from this chart too, I'll jump back to. One, really that altcoin blue area, it only really peaked after Bitcoin did. So I want you to remember that. So there's sort of two things here. One, altcoins are obviously much more volatile than Bitcoin, went up more dramatically, came down more dramatically. Two, the altcoin rally followed Bitcoin, and I'll show you later that this has happened historically a couple of times. So now let me go back into just sort of how we filter this rainbow, as I like to call it. So we can think of this generally. I like to think about how did this asset class even get to where we are today. So in 2009, like I said, it was only Bitcoin. A couple of years later, Litecoin came out, very similar to Bitcoin, just trying to decrease the times, etc., just small iterations. Over the years, we've seen these new kind of narratives or themes in the market. Some of these had to do with the permission chain, some of what we heard about earlier, enterprises getting involved, stuff like Ripple or Hyperledger, Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. We also saw this narrative of privacy currencies, which I'll show you. I lumped into stuff like Bitcoin too, but again, these are transactional currencies. Some of these new projects just thought, okay, this is a public ledger, and kind of as we found out over the years, it's not as private as you might think. If we decode one address and match that to an identity, the sort of an anonymity just falls apart entirely. After privacy coins, we sort of saw this brand new shift that really started with something like Ethereum, where they put in this Turing-complete smart contract programming language so people could essentially build their own apps on top of this dApp platform. This is unlike Bitcoin, which intentionally restricted its programming language to keep it more simple at the base layer. But Ethereum started this new trend, and then because we had this dApp platform, obviously people wanted to build dApps on top of that. So, and then of course, once we get to dApps, at this point we have hundreds of tokens, so we need some sort of decentralized exchange to trade them all in an interoperability protocol so they can actually communicate with each other and they're not super siloed off. Now there's a bunch of other themes that I don't really go into, again, like equities. I mostly focus on liquid assets, stuff like stable coins, which are supposed to track stuff like fiat currencies, this new trend around securities tokens like Perianne was talking about, etc. But I really like to focus on three main groups. So I took that whole thing and I said most of them are either currencies, some sort of dApp platform, or a dApp built on top. This is how I would generally like to start bucketing things. So let's generally kind of look at the stage. Now, very much like I said the asset class evolved, the stage of the projects also follow, which makes sense. So most of the currencies are live, they were first. A lot of these dApp platforms are live too. Ethereum came out a year after the ICO. A lot of these dApp platforms were sort of in development when I actually made this slide, since we've seen some more come to market, like EOS and Tezos, but a lot still remain under development. And then lagging even the dApp platforms, which makes sense, is of course the dApps on top. People can't really start making the dApps until they have this sort of tool set available with the dApp platform. So generally you can think currencies are the farthest along, and of course everything created later is much later stage. So here's some core sort of like fundamental things I like to think about when I'm analyzing something. The thing on the right is a little overwhelming, but I'll just sort of try and walk through row by row. Generally, when you're looking at any crypto asset, you want to say, what's the target addressable market of this thing? So I'll go into it in a second, but Bitcoin's really easy to think. Store of value, like gold. Gold is a great analogous market where that people want to store their value in. If we're looking at something like a DApp, it's a little less clear. Some of these are trying to be some sort of distributed file storage, distributed computation, some sort of gambling platform. At a minimum, you need to realize that the target addressable market for a DApp is much less than the overall store of value market. That's probably the largest market on earth. What I mean by this next one, monopoly, is this asset going to be winner take all? So generally when I look at stuff like the stock market, there can obviously be 1,000 different companies. There can be a company for every single industry, tons of competitors. Same makes sense for dApps. You can make an app for storage, computation, whatever. But if you're competing on currencies, I think currencies and dApp platforms are really almost winner take all markets. I think that there will be pretty much one winning store of value asset, the one that's the most liquid, the one that most people have their money in, that most merchants adopt, etc. I think there's large network effects about having one sort of dominant money. So generally, when you're thinking about something like an allocation strategy long-term of investing in 10 different cryptocurrencies, you need to think, is this the type of market that's going to eventually collapse down into one, or really can 10 prosper next to each other? Velocity, what I mean by this is sort of this concept of token velocity. So how much does the actual token transact in the network? Kind of how much is available for sale at any time? So generally when we're talking about stuff like store of value assets, these things like Bitcoin, primarily in a store of value asset, you're storing your value. You're not sending it around that much, you're primarily holding it, thus it's not on the market for sale. If you're talking about something like a dApp currency, something that needs to be exchanged multiple times, like maybe some currency that's native to a gambling platform, and people are making bets all the time, exchanging it with people, I think that the value is a lot less likely to accrue down. I really think the more that the token's essentially transacted and floating around, there's more up for sale all the time, and value really accrues with those assets that are held, not transacted regularly. The stage I just went into, the team I'd like to just kind of highlight, a lot of these dApps look more like companies. It's like 3 or 4 guys starting a startup that maybe decide to raise equity or one of these ICOs. Something like Bitcoin or Ether is this open source movement that now like thousands of people around the globe are working on. Here to say, who's the core 3 guys of Bitcoin, and a lot of people would give you different answers. That's definitely not the case for a lot of these dApps. The team is pretty clear. Liquidity I'll go into a second too, but Bitcoin is the most liquid asset by far, and liquidity in the crypto asset class falls off quite dramatically. I would say by the time you get to dApps, which are these newer projects, a lot of them have maybe less than single-digit $1 million of trading volume a day, which isn't that much when it's spread across like 20 different exchanges across the world. And lastly, regulation. The big one here that a lot of people went into is obviously the ICO is the really risky thing in my head. Was this an unregistered illegal securities offering, or was it basically launched by mining? There was no initial sale. There's nobody to go after. So kind of like a bunch of these people went into, like what's the overall market size here? I'm looking at store value. Bitcoin's only about 200 billion now. Really relevant ones are gold at 8 trillion, and then you can start going into M1, M2, all these different country fiat currencies. Essentially the idea here is just think of the store of value market alone. Gold is already magnitudes higher than Bitcoin, and gold is just a tiny sum of the money that's stored in all these assets around the world. So let's actually look, how do you fundamentally value any of these sort of crypto assets? So let's use just Bitcoin and gold. If we look at line 1, about $10 trillion market size, really a simplistic analysis here is just how much of gold's market do you think Bitcoin will capture? You can really almost do a simple just multiplication sign down, divide by the number of Bitcoins that are in the network at a given time via the supply curve, and derive at some sort of underlying price. This is obviously extremely simplistic, but you can see there's some sort of general fundamental valuation model you can't set up here. I'll show you one for a totally different type of asset in a second. But let's look at some more general fundamental data. So for the currency type of things, obviously how many transactions happen on the network, and we can obviously compare those. What was the average transaction size in dollars? Are people sending nothing or meaningful amounts of numbers? Here, the average Bitcoin transaction was about $53,000 when I pulled this. What's the median transaction size? You can see it goes down to 614. Obviously, this is being skewed a lot by some really large or really small transactions. And this one is absolutely crucial. What is the average transaction fee? This is part of the reason we have so many different crypto assets. this is part of the reason we've seen so much debate and hostility in the market, is in events like this. When one Bitcoin transaction cost almost $50 to make in December, as we initially heard, part of Bitcoin's initial saying was send money anywhere in the world for free. $50 is certainly not for free. You can't even send anything for less than $50. The fee is worth more than that. Now this whole thing happened due to basically Bitcoin deciding to concentrate on the decentralization of the system by limiting the maximum block size, which limits how many transactions can go into a block, which limits how many people can make, and thus drives the fee market up a lot. Obviously, if more transactions were allowed to happen on the network, the fee would fall, but we would basically be centralizing the core nodes of the system to only large supercomputers that can process all these large blocks. So basically, this kind of goes into part of my end game. Essentially, what are currency networks competing on now if they're all just cryptocurrencies? Right now, it's kind of like capacity and cost. How many transactions can you do and how much do they cost? Also, is there any privacy? Is this a totally transparent ledger, or is there any privacy components? Also, the governance. How do we sort of vote on new upgrades? Some of these coins get coin holders sort of votes on upgrades to the system, and some don't. So those are some sort of differentiators. In the future, again, I'm curious. Really, I think if Bitcoin develops a robust layer 2 system, which it already kind of is going in that direction with the Lightning Network, which is very live, and integrate some privacy features into the core protocol via sidechain or just an easy way for users to make optional privacy payments in the wallet. My big question is really, why would any other cryptocurrency exist at that point besides Bitcoin? So let me take this a completely different direction and show you how a fundamental value model works with something that's not a pure store value asset, so I'm not just multiplying by gold's market cap. So this is REP. This is a token that is associated with the Augur DApp, which is an Ethereum project that's basically a decentralized prediction market, or a gambling platform, if you will. Now, you don't actually need this REP token to gamble on the platform. You can use Ether to place bets. What this other token does, called REP, is actually allows you to be an oracle that settles the market. So basically, we bet on who's going to be the president next election. After the fact, the people that decide who is actually the president and input that information to settle the bet are these oracles or the rep holders, and thus they're paid basically a percentage of all the money that's bet on that specific market. So you can very fundamentally measure this out. How big is the global prediction market? You can see current, it's not illegal everywhere. There are a few platforms. What percent market share do you think Augur will take? That's the total betting volume. What percent of fees do rep holders get? And basically, how many markets are you going to be an oracle on? Spread that out on how many times you can be an oracle over the year, and discount that back at some risk rate or rate that Augur will blow up for regulatory or technical reasons. But essentially, you can map up. This is very correlated to just how big these markets are going to be and what fee is on that. So you can see that cryptocurrencies, some do have very clear fundamental value models. So a general thing too, fundamental value point for really any sort of crypto asset is really like, what are the computers on the network? Who are the nodes? How many are there? Where are they? And just generally, how does everyone come to consensus on this system? Is this 3 computers in one house over there? If so, that's not really a decentralized ledger. That's not the entire point of cryptocurrency. It should be spread out and distributed, decentralized. So we can also, this ties very much into the hash rate. So the miners are the actual computers that are creating new blocks in the system. The point is this to be totally decentralized and split between a bunch. We can see with some of these examples, like Litecoin, for example, if only those top 3 mining pools were to sort of collaborate together, you can see that they'd have over 51% of the system and essentially negate the entire point of the decentralized system. If 3 entities can pull together and change the history of the ledger, then that's kind of against the entire point of crypto. So it's very crucial to keep your eye on how decentralized is this from nodes, miners, etc. It's really who has power on the system. It should be decentralized and not have points of failure like that. So also funding. So this is interesting. These crypto projects basically have a choice. You don't have to create a token. A lot of these projects can do pure equity. There's a layer 2 system on the Ethereum network called Raiden, which has a token. There's a layer 2 system on the Bitcoin network called Lightning, which does not have a token. One of these projects raise equity, the other raises an ICO. Now, along with that, with an ICO, maybe there is a regulatory leeway to do it. You need to follow proper registrations, have a proper lawyer, make sure it's not a security, XYZ. At a minimum, if there's an ICO, a small red flag gets thrown in my head that I need to look into it and make sure, because that's an additional risk. One thing that's super interesting in crypto is asking companies what their balance sheet looks like. Because a lot of these ICOs are conducted, they're giving you tokens in exchange for Bitcoin or Ether. Now, like a normal startup, you'd think, all right, they just raised $20 million, probably gonna budget like 4 years of runway or whatever. A huge percent of these crypto projects kept all their ICO funding in Ether and have lost 90% of it right now. So there's several teams that have raised $40 million earlier this year, now have about 4. So basically, what's your balance sheet? Are you a crypto hedge fund for yourself, or are you a company? Is essentially the question. You get really wildly variable answers. So another thing to be aware of is, what does the supply look like? So if you're looking at any sort of market cap, you need to realize that's price times supply, and supply in crypto is really unclear. Bitcoin right now, there's like 17 million that have been mined out of 21 million. This is really different across the asset class. You don't know exactly what the total supply curve is, what the total supply is at all, how much is mined now, if any of the team or other people own the supply. Essentially, the market cap and value in general can be very variable depending on how the thing's mined, how it's issued, who owns the tokens, if there's investing, etc. Something you really need to be aware of. And then again, kind of on that note, who owns the supply? You know, is there literally less than 10 people that own 90% of this tokens? Why is this a risk? If 10 people decide to sell, the entire market just got sold. So you need to realize, you know, is this a decentralized, strong holder base that has been holding since the onset? Or does one hedge fund, for example, own all the assets, and we've known this hedge fund will sell at any point possible? So basically, is there a huge risk that one or a few parties could dump the entire price? This is probably the most crucial question in crypto that is honestly asked the least. In a lot of these crypto projects, when you see these tokens fly up, it's basically, why is there a token there? What does it do? What does this token get me when I actually hold it? Could this system exist without a token at all? Here's an example, like, take that gambling debt, for example. If you had to hold the token to actually get access to gamble on the debt, it's basically adding another layer of friction than if I could just go in and bet with Ether that I already have. It's like basically going to a casino in Las Vegas. Having to exchange to their native tokens is essentially an extra nuanced step. It'd be a lot easier if they could just walk in and place bets with their existing currency. And if they're just sort of you buying this token to access this system, and then let me rephrase that actually. Same analogy. If you go to Vegas, you essentially take your dollars, you exchange them for tokens, you gamble as much as you want. At the end of Vegas, you take those tokens back. You get as much dollars as you can, you take those home. There's basically no reason to hold the Vegas tokens, which is a lot analogous to how I view these DApp tokens. If I want to actually use the DApp, I'll buy the tokens, I'll use the DApp, and I'll sell them and take it back to Bitcoin. I'm storing my value in that. I want to store my value in it. I want to use something else, I'll use it and get rid of it. And then one crucial thing that's very related to that is just, if I hold it, basically, am I subject to any sort of dividend system? Do I get interest? So some of these assets are using this system called proof of stake, where essentially you can use your stake to almost be analogous to a Bitcoin miner to essentially get future block rewards in exchange for staking, which is an interesting incentive to actually hold the token. And then this is really obvious, but this is totally public data. You should probably be aware of it. People actually care about your asset. The nice thing about Google Trends and stuff too is you can see what geographies they're coming from, how spread their interest is across various social followings. One thing that's pretty relevant here too is it's really easy to fake a lot of data in crypto. Like faking a large number of transactions, if the transaction fee on the system is a penny, you can do that pretty easily for a few $100. You could pretty easily buy 100,000 Twitter followers to fake it. So all these data points are very good to be aware of, but you need to also realize which ones are easy to spoof, which just takes a lot of, it's a very nuanced industry. And of course, this is all open source software, so you can also see how much people are actually developing on the GitHub. Have people not made any update to their code in the last year? Is this project dying? Not only that, who's actually contributing to the GitHub? Are these people spread out all over? Is this one company? And has anyone audited it? Has the software been looked at by experts? Is it closed off and they're going to release it close to launch for some reason? Just generally, what's the development of the code look like and who's doing it? Who else has looked at it? So I've just shown you a bunch of fundamentals, and now I'm basically going to come back and tell you that this is a market, and in the end, crypto is basically totally removed from fundamentals. Fundamentals in this market almost do not matter at all. You know, maybe long term, but day to day, what really moves markets is news, rumors, and information, and honestly, just money moving. You know, you want to buy in before a bunch of other people buy, and you want to sell before a bunch of other people sell. That's about it. And a lot of it ends up going into the difference between the expectations and the reality of what's actually happening. So very much like, you know, stock prices basically react not to what the earnings are, but what analysts think the earnings were going to be, and then how they did relative to that. So I'll go into that with a good example. So at CoinDesk in Q1 17, about 18 months ago, I asked people how they felt about Bitcoin and how they felt about Ethereum. This was about when Bitcoin's fee first went above the $1 for the first time, so people were generally pretty pissed, mostly about Bitcoin fees. Ethereum, everyone was extremely ecstatic. And this is funny, there was another follow-up question, how do you feel about the overall state of Ethereum dApps? Looked almost exactly the same. At that point, I don't think there was even like one Ethereum dApp live at all. It was just exuberance about the idea. Basically, a lot of people were excited about this idea of decentralized applications. Today, over 3 years after Ethereum's launch, most dApps have not more than a couple hundred users at all. All total Ethereum dApps combined have never had more than 50,000 users on a given day. This is clearly not getting that much usage, and it hasn't been that little time either. The Ethereum ICO was in 2014. So another one, when do you think Ethereum would be live on proof of stake? Again, just huge expectations. So 7% of people thought it would not be live right now. It's not live, by the way, so 93% of people have been wrong. So I actually wrote an article about a month ago, which is pretty interesting. Basically just how these predictions from about 18 months ago translate to today. So basically, one interesting about this asset class, thankfully, is it matured large enough that there's a shorting market. For those of you that aren't that aware of what shorting is, basically means you're going to borrow an asset from someone else that you don't currently own. You're going to sell it. You're going to buy it back at a later time and give it back to them, maybe plus some interest. So generally, this is probably one of my fund's most public pieces of writing. Something about the best reception for is essentially a bearish thesis against Ether, which had a lot to do about those expectations versus what we thought reality would be. Generally, how we think it's not a great dApp platform, capital raising platform, or store value platform, which we thought were the three underlying main use cases of Ether. So essentially, we wrote this thesis in about May, and this is one where you can generally hedge your exposure to the full asset class, of course. So going back to what I said at the beginning when I wanted you to look at the fact that all coins generally follow Bitcoin, this is pretty interesting. If you look at this chart, this is something that the company Fundstrat has put together. It's pretty cool. It's essentially the percentage of total altcoins that have gone over 3x in the last 90 days. So essentially altcoins that have just boomed. So this has happened in kind of 3 distinct cycles. And one in early 2016, one about May 2017, if everyone remembers the first consensus 2017 when Ether went above from 40 to 200 real fast, and then in December, this last absolute mania. Now the interesting thing about that, A, they're symmetrical, that's pretty interesting on its own. B, if you were to chart the price of Bitcoin, it essentially is right before all of these, which generally goes into my full thesis of only once wealth is created in the strongest underlying asset and people feel comfortable and they become wealthy, at that point will they sort of look further down the risk reward curve. People are generally not going to speculate in a bear market. Right now, a lot of the low volatility in Bitcoin, I think people have basically just capitulated to holding. People are just generally done with the volatility, that they're exhausted. If you have Bitcoin, you're holding. If you wanted to sell, you would have already sold. It's just a lot of holding right now. So generally, where do I view Bitcoin? How do I view a lot of these assets? Bitcoin I view as the clear crypto asset leader. It's the longest, it's the most secure by hash rate, it's the most liquid by trading volume. Institutions and regulators are going to favor Bitcoin the most because of mostly those reasons. If an ETF or a structured product is going to get approved, I think it will start with Bitcoin, again, because it has the most history, most security, least incidents associated with it, and underlying liquidity. I think one of the biggest bull narratives we've recently seen is basically the introduction of BACT, which is an exchange that's owned by NYSE and ICE, and as well as Fidelity's entrance to the space as well. Both are going to be involved in basically custodying and exchanging of crypto assets. I would say those two entrances, as well as probably the top 5 endowments in the US into crypto recently, in Yale, MIT, Stanford, Harvard, and UNC, all backing a crypto fund. or Bitcoin directly. It's just essentially painted a pretty big, bold narrative coming in my mind, probably sometime in 2019 around ETF inflows, and most of this bullishness, I believe, will be centered around Bitcoin. What's interesting about the ETF is basically right now the SEC is concerned about market manipulation and just the overall immaturity of the market. If you look at where most trading goes down, I mean, as an institution, that doesn't make you feel comfortable. There's not a name you probably recognize on there at all. You know, these are all overseas. These have all, a lot of these have literally been hacked. The top exchanges that still trade today. And generally, just institutions are not comfortable with these names and the practices happening on these exchanges. Now, altcoins, these markets are much worse. As you can see in this chart here, I mean, liquidity, again, I told you dropped off, but it drops off extremely dramatically. And again, a lot of these altcoins are the result of ICOs, which have regulatory concerns. And early stage deals, which I haven't really talked about much, but I want to jump into. So this is essentially something that happens, a deal that happens before it's live. So like a simple agreement for a future token or an ICO. And essentially this chart on the left, this is what I view as sort of the ICO gauntlet, the road to liquidity. So if I'm thinking about buying a crypto asset, I think, all right, how long is this thing going to take to get liquid? And I need to compare it to something like Bitcoin on the right that's already liquid. If you invest in a very early stage SAP, something like Filecoin or Polkadot, basically the events you have to wait for until it becomes liquid like Bitcoin are the team needs to develop the actual technology. They need to get legal approval to actually do an ICO or some sort of initial token issuance or launch process. You actually need to transfer the tokens, which the team can stall on. You actually need to get through an investing period, which is pretty common with a lot of these initial periods. And then you actually have to get listed on an exchange, which is becoming a harder and harder process due to these securities concerns. Some exchanges don't have the proper licensing and all these other things. So my point here is essentially that you need to look at any investment in an early stage deal, really compare the risk reward and liquidity versus something like Bitcoin that's already liquid. And when you dive into the data a bit, this chart on the right, I basically ran a scenario of if you invested $1 into every single ICO starting at various date, or you invested into Bitcoin or Ether at the exact same time, sort of what strategy would have done better. You can see on the right, sort of, actually just keeping dollars would have been the best, of course, because 2018 was a total bear market. But the liquid assets, Bitcoin and then Ether, dramatically outperformed ICOs really after the first single January 17 bar. And the interesting thing there is a lot of ICO returns, you need to be aware, are just marked of their ROI with the current price. But for example, the biggest contender in this, the reason that the January bar looks so high is it's claiming one ICO returned about 400x. Now the big thing there that if you didn't look into it more, you'd think, okay, that was just a really good ICO, I should invest in ICOs. That ICO currently is trading about $15,000 a day. So if you were an investor that even invested 10 bucks, you can't sell out of your position right now, thus that ROI is pretty much not a real figure. So regulatory risk. Again, the SEC said that the DAO tokens were actual securities. This was not a registered security sale in the US, and they blatantly sold these securities to unaccredited US investors. The SEC also recently said, at least one person from the SEC said in their opinion they don't believe that Ether is currently a security, and they intentionally separated out the initial offering of Ether. So pretty much in my head, and I actually wrote this article this morning, a humongous wave of regulation is coming towards ICOs. A lot of these crypto assets right now are currently securities, and the ones that aren't, like even Ether, for example, has still not passed the flag of the initial raise. A lot of these ICOs were likely unregistered illegal securities offerings. But again, crypto is a global market. I'm most knowledgeable about the US, but there are obviously ways that you can do this in jurisdictions where ICOs aren't illegal, ignore US investors, etc. Generally, as an overall portfolio, I talked a little bit about liquid assets versus early stage deals. I think you should always keep in mind how your overall portfolio looks like too. So in general, of course, you can sprinkle on some small early stage exposure into a portfolio, but just make sure that you don't have sort of the same correlated risk with a lot of these positions. So a lot of crypto assets are all exposed to ICO risk. Pretty much every ERC20 offering, which is a large amount of the market, has risk with both the initial offering as well as all being built on the same underlying platform with Ethereum. So in general, you need to be aware that a lot of the crypto asset class is a lot more correlated than you may think when you're constructing your portfolio. And again, with this last note, generally, you should think about every single crypto asset with basically the opportunity cost versus any liquid asset. I obviously view Bitcoin as the market leader, but in general, just think about making any investment of sort of what your alternatives are, which is even holding it in cash or holding it in something already liquid that's less volatile. And here's my just giant love fest. I think crypto is the greatest industry ever. Startups are super cool. How do you actually join this thing? I feel like a lot of people are intimidated. I mean, pretty much what's needed, software. There's a ton of code to be written. People like me that attempt to make sense out of this asset class, and literally the laws are really scrambled. We need as much help as we can. How do you actually get involved? You don't need to apply to a lot of these companies. This is startup stuff. This is very informal. A lot of people that I know in crypto, I met them on Twitter. Most people that have got hired on other crypto funds like mine have gotten hired because they wrote theses online. Literally just put yourself out there. People that like certain crypto projects, they all have subreddits. You can literally go onto the forum, give them a comment, and the head developer will respond to you. Basically, like, be scrappy, get your name out there, and just write crap on the internet, or else how is anybody going to know who you are? So yeah, join me. Thanks a lot.
We are always watching, what are the states doing, what are the states doing, what are they doing? And that's because what we do is important, and it's a microcosm of what could affect them nationally. So what is the Florida model? What are we going to do this upcoming legislative session? Right now, we're still a newly developed organization. We're still building our infrastructure, and we're still doing a lot of our education. Right? So we've met multiple times with the CFO's office. We've talked to them about this crypto czar. We've expressed to them our concerns. But we've also met with a lot of politicians about possibly sponsoring friendly legislation. What that is still unseen. We're waiting to hear back from our community. We're consistently asking businesses, what is hurting you? What do you like that other states are doing? And what could possibly benefit you? Right? So we're still trying to let that organically solve itself. And we're also developing a legal team so that we can approach that smart. So that's a pretty short presentation. But one thing I did want to mention is the reason Florida has so much potential is specifically, I think, because of events like this and organizations like this. Right? I have gone to almost every major college in Florida. Right? So I graduated from USF, go Bulls, and they have a crypto club there. I'm going to, I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to FSU tomorrow. They're having a conference hosted by their crypto club. There's conferences in the University of Miami. They have a crypto club. All these run by college students who have no direct, say, mission implied in their organization. They're doing it because they're passionate about it, right? What they don't realize is everything they do, like the people who hosted this conference, is helping on a legislative level. Because it's education for just average people, it's education for politicians who decide they want to come, and it's education for industry leaders, right? So a lot of it is just organic, and it just needs to be organized and targeted, right? And so that's why I think organizations like the Gator Bitcoin Club and organizations like the USF Crypto Club and events like this are so important, right? Because they give us an opportunity to see what that grassroots activity is, and it helps me with my mission, which is to make Florida the friendliest blockchain and crypto geographical area, hopefully in the globe. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Alrighty guys, so next up we got Aaron Pfeiffer. He is a core developer with the Monero community. So let's welcome him to the stage.
All right, thank you. Thanks for having me here. It is my pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Aaron Fikers, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about privacy in digital assets, a little bit about how it works, not too technical of a level, and in particular where it's going and why we care about it, particularly in the case of digital assets. So I do work with the Monero Research Lab, which is the research and development arm of the Monero project, which is a pure asset project that is entirely community developed and supported. And I will be talking about Monero a little bit in the context of privacy. My goals for you today are to both appreciate the importance of both privacy and fungibility in assets, talk a little bit about why they're different, how they're interconnected, and why we care about them in particular with assets, to understand the role of privacy in applications and how it works, and also in particular weigh trade-offs in security, efficiency, and usability, which is kind of highlight the overarching theme of my talk, which is that this is very, very challenging. Anyone who claims to have figured it out is probably full of it. So usual disclaimers, I am here independently, not representing the Monero Research Lab or Monero project officially. I do receive funding from Monero community members, so you should view that as a conflict of interest here. And finally, this is not investing or endorsement. So when Bitcoin came out, and now we're kind of celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Bitcoin white paper now, a lot of people kind of misconstrued it as being something that was anonymous or private or fungible, or whatever kind of combination of those good sounding words you want. And in fact, we got a lot of groups like even CNN Money saying that Bitcoins can be used to buy merchandise anonymously. And while name anonymity keeps Bitcoin users' transaction private, it also lets them buy or sell anything without easily tracing it back. Which, if you've been following how tracing works in the Bitcoin ecosystem, you know that that is deliciously quaint nowadays. Chain analysis is extremely popular, extremely common, and we now have a much better understanding of the fact that Bitcoin is in fact not private. The dirty truth with Bitcoin is that while you do hold cryptographic keys that are not directly associated necessarily with your name, the presence of those keys and transactions and a lot of metadata about your Bitcoin transactions or similar transparent ledgers is all completely on the blockchain. Whether or not you can read this is unimportant, but this is a transaction that I pulled off of the chain several months ago. And I can see, and we don't need to be able to read it, that a particular address that's listed up there sent about $6.8 million worth of Bitcoin to these two addresses. Now, I do not know who holds those addresses. If they're entities, individuals, if they are, good for them. But I can tell you exactly how many times those addresses interacted with each other. And if you do some analysis in this particular example, you'll find out that those particular individuals using those addresses transacted millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin all the time. If I found out who did control those, say if I were, I don't know, some kind of adversary, a government, an exchange, or what have you, that gives me a lot of information about those individuals' spending behaviors. And that's maybe not something that I want. And in particular, we're discovering how to use things like graph and chain analysis in order to kind of trace down what's going on with a lot of different kinds of Bitcoin and similar transactions. And in fact, as I'm sure a lot of people who are much more familiar with the business side of this than I can tell you, we're trying to figure out ways to use existing financial theory to kind of trace stolen Bitcoins and decide what we want to do with the idea that a Bitcoin might be tainted by some kind of previous transaction history. And in fact, other cryptographic assets are building this right in. One particular project decided in its software to to blacklist tainted funds to ensure that exchanges would never accept them. So what this means for you as the user of one of these digital assets is you could accept Bitcoin or any number of transparent assets. You might have no idea where those coins came from. But chain analysis, like the kind that's being done by many companies and institutions around the world, might identify that those Bitcoins or other assets were used in, I don't know, some kind of unsavory behavior, like a ransomware attack or a drug deal. An exchange might choose to blacklist the funds that you received, even though you had absolutely nothing to do with that unsavory past. So this means in particular that Bitcoin is absolutely not anonymous, private, or fungible in the way that we might want if we wanted to behave like digital cash, which, if you've read the white paper, you know is the big overarching philosophical goal of a lot of these asset projects. So what exactly do we mean when we talk about privacy? If we have kind of this general vague notion that Bitcoin is in fact not private, what does that mean? Well, we'll go ahead for our purposes and say that you are anonymous if your identity cannot be distinguished within a particular group. This is very much distinct with the way that we just talked about Bitcoin and other examples. Those imply what you might call pseudo-anonymity or pseudonymity, where you basically just rename yourself. In Bitcoin, I basically rename myself to a cryptographic key, or many keys if I choose to do that, but I'm not hidden within any kind of anonymity set. If you figure out that I'm associated with those keys, you can go through the blockchain and figure out everything that I've done. Senders, recipients, amounts. So in the context of cryptographic assets in particular, we want the following things to be completely indistinguishable. I want the sender of the funds to be indistinguishable. I want the recipient of the funds to be indistinguishable, and I want the amount of the transaction to be indistinguishable. So that means that anyone examining the blockchain, even if they somehow figure out what cryptographic keys I control, should not be able to determine any of the following things about my transactions. It seems like a very tall order, and it's one that a lot of kind of some of the original projects, Bitcoin's kind of the quintessential example, of course, absolutely do not accomplish. There are some people who claim that things like second layer solutions might kind of modify this and make some of these possible, but that introduces a lot of interesting technical challenges involving threat models that I really don't want to go into. So when I say fungible, what I mean, and if you're in other kind of trading and other asset-based communities, you probably have an idea what this word means. But I'm going to say that an asset, we can use digital assets here too, we'll call them fungible if we cannot distinguish one asset from another equivalent value. Kind of the classic example of this is gold bars. If I have two gold bars, one in my left hand and one in my right, of equal weight and purity and whatever you care about with gold, you can't blacklist one of those gold bars. They are indistinguishable and they are equivalent. I can use them in any transaction I want. It's impossible to blacklist them. So I want something that behaves much like the coins that Scrooge McDuck might have. Not in the case of Bitcoin, where we've already discussed that it is absolutely possible to track and blacklist similar assets to Bitcoin. If I can blacklist it, it is not fungible. And why exactly is this important? There are a whole lot of use cases that are particularly dependent on how you use digital assets, either as an individual, or an organization, or an institution. So, first of all, I kind of claim that from a big, broad, philosophical, we want digital cash sense, all of these things, privacy, fungibility, anonymity, they should be inherent in transactions just as a matter of course. And that is particularly true if you're dealing with asset projects, like all the classic ones, that have an open blockchain. You can go and download the Bitcoin blockchain, the Zcash blockchain, the Ethereum blockchain, if you really want to. If those things are in fact public, I want to make sure that nothing can get out about my transactions. A couple questions you might ask yourself. Would you accept your salary in a cryptocurrency if the amount that you were paid was public and known? I don't know, if you make a lot of money, perhaps you don't want that known. You might consider yourself personally at risk. And frankly, it's no one's damn business. And you might ask yourself, would you use a distributed digital asset like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on? Would you use that to conduct business? If things like your supply chain transactions and history, all of your cash flow, or the data of the customers who are interacting with you were known to the public and to your competitors? If you do, I think you need to strongly rethink your business strategy. If you're something like a bank or other governmental institution, you might also be subject to other secrecy laws that make this very, very hairy if you wish to use them. But maybe you don't buy or sell drugs or any of the horrible things that the media might claim people use this stuff for. And to be fair, we have pretty good indications that a lot of people have used Bitcoin and similar things for some things that I personally disagree with. But we already said your funds could be blacklisted and made unavailable to you even if you did not have anything to do with previous histories involving illicit transactions. And my favorite example of all of this is like, if you don't think privacy is important if you have nothing to hide, would you be okay with someone putting a camera in your bathroom? I know I wouldn't. I don't do anything unsavory in there, but we do know that in general, privacy is important as a matter of course, even if we have nothing to hide. So I don't buy that argument, and neither should you. So can we actually do this? This is a very, very tall order, asking for something that is both private and fungible. There are plenty of examples of projects that have tried. I consider there to be 2 projects that are doing this correctly. Keep in mind I'm paid by one of them. You should view that as a conflict of interest. So let's look at 2 examples, Zcash and Monero, both of which are pure assets that try their best to be private and fungible, and to varying degrees of success depending how you use them. Let's look at both. First, Zcash. So Zcash is a cryptographic asset, and its goal is to basically use 2 different types of addresses. One's called transparent and one is called shielded. You get to choose which of these 2 address pools you interact with. I can tell you right now, transparent Zcash transactions are identical to Bitcoin transactions. The underlying code base and cryptography are exactly the same. So there is no privacy inherent in those whatsoever. You can see the sender, the recipient, and the amount. However, shielded transactions in Zcash, if you operate in this secondary pool that operates much differently to Bitcoin, those hide the sender and receiver completely. You can look at a transaction on the Zcash shielded blockchain. You can see that there was a transaction made between some entity and some other entity, but you cannot even view the cryptographic keys that identify those senders and recipients. The amount is also completely hidden. There's some really, really fancy math, and if you follow this, you may know, or at least know of, the phrase ZK snark, which stands for zero knowledge, succinct, non-interactive argument of knowledge, which we are not going to talk about. And it's basically a zero-knowledge proving system that lets any observer make sure that all the transactions on the blockchain were done correctly without revealing any of that information. So you kind of have to make a lot of decisions about how you choose to interact with Zcash. You can move your funds between these transparent shielded pools. And in particular, this is kind of the big, dirty Zcash open secret, the initialization of the entire Zcash blockchain required a trusted setup process where a bunch of folks basically generated some private parameters and then proceeded to supposedly destroy those private parameters. And those parameters are necessary in order to make these so-called ZK snarks very small and very efficient to verify. But it does mean that if that process were done incorrectly, or if you don't trust the company that did it, they would be able to print unlimited free Zcash. So, do you trust them? I don't know. It's up to you. Monero, kind of as an alternative to this, is a cryptographic project that does not allow any transparent transactions whatsoever. Think of it as sort of akin to Zcash, but without that whole transparent side. So in Monero, slightly different from Zcash, senders are anonymous, but they're not fully anonymous. They're anonymous within a small, self-selected group of individuals, or technically individual private keys. The receivers or recipients are fully anonymous, and the transaction amounts are fully unknown. So in Monero, if you look at the blockchain, you still don't see direct cryptographic keys. What you do see is that every transaction involves one of the following entities sending some unknown amount to some unknown recipient. Monero does not include a so-called trusted setup. You don't have to trust that any ceremonial process was done correctly, and it uses kind of a layered approach. It uses confidential transaction models to hide the amount, uses so-called stealth addresses to hide the recipient, and a structure called a ring signature that I'm not going to go into the details of that hides the senders within a small group. So much different technologies that are used to try to accomplish the same thing, but in different ways. And of course, there's tons of projects that promise all sorts of very, very broad, undefined things involving privacy. You know, depending on who you ask, they might agree or disagree with you. I don't consider any other approaches to this to be satisfactory. Monero, I consider, does a pretty good job. Zcash, I would say, does a pretty good job, given certain assumptions about the way they did the process. Dash uses a mixing process that is absolutely not equivalent to that. Verge is one that was popular for a while for apparently buying pornography on the internet. It does a terrible, terribly god-awful job of doing that if you choose to buy porn on the internet for some reason. And of course, Bitcoin and a lot of other solutions on top of that involving mixing are absolutely not private. Mixing is not the same as the cryptographic approaches I'm discussing here. So I'm not saying I fully agree with the different conclusions of this chart, but it gives you an example of some other projects that are making claims. Now these do have real trade-offs. I'll tell you right now, there's no silver bullet in this space. I'm not saying Monero has it right, and I'm not saying that Zcash has it right. I am saying that Verge does not have it right, though. Here are some of the trade-offs, right? So privacy, right? We want things like the senders and recipients and the amounts to be private. But if you ask, for example, US law enforcement, do they like those things? They'll probably say no. We need to be able to trace things like drug deals or whatever horrifying things people might actually do with these assets. So these things are at odds with each other. The users might want things that are fully private, law enforcement might want to weigh in. Those things do not go together. You cannot safely introduce a backdoor cryptographic system flat out, it doesn't work. Things like efficiency, time, space, and operating system requirements. For example, Monero you can do on a phone. Monero transactions tend to be bigger than, say, Zcash transactions, and they may be a little bit slower in some ways to do, but that's a trade-off in Monero for not having to have any kind of trust in a company to do it right. Zcash transactions, on the other hand, and they actually just released a new update that's supposed to address some of these. Prior to very, very recently, like a couple of days ago, Zcash transactions were, while very small and very fast to verify, very, very tedious and long to actually generate. So basically, it was impossible to do on a mobile device. So in terms of person-to-person payments, not really the solution. We're trying to address this. And finally, correct user behavior. There's a saying I love called the tyranny of the default, which says that given all other things being equal, a user of a cryptographic system is going to do the default thing. Users should not be expected to know a lot about cryptography or computer science or correct behavior. The default behavior offered by a cryptographic system should be the safe and correct thing. So in Zcash, for example, you have to decide if you want to operate in this transparent pool or a shielded pool or move between them safely, and what does that mean? And in Monero, you have to make decisions about, for example, until recently, like the size of your anonymity set and some technical details. So we want to make sure that whatever these assets are doing by default is the correct thing. So it's kind of this big, ugly interaction between all of these things. You always generally have to sacrifice something, even though we're getting a lot better at this cryptographically. And these trade-offs actually have real-world consequences. So for example, in 2017 and again in 2018, there was some research done on the Zcash blockchain. And it revealed that you could actually link a lot of Zcash transactions, which you are not supposed to be able to do, when transactions moved from the transparent pool to the shielded pool and then back again. People try to use it as kind of a fund laundering service. Well, it turns out you can do some information about timing and amounts and things to gain a lot of information about transactions you were supposed to have no insight into. And that's a consequence of the fact that their privacy is optional. In Monero, for example, there's several examples. I'll talk about one. Earlier in 2018, there was an unaffiliated fork, and actually several forks of the Monero blockchain by unaffiliated groups that were basically out for a cash grab. And it turns out that if they convinced users to claim existing funds from Monero on this new bizarre fork they had going on, those people could compromise their own anonymity and contribute in very, very small ways to the de-anonymization of others. And that in particular is a consequence of some of the cryptography that Monero uses involving ring signatures and double spend protections. So whether or not you care about these particular examples, there are examples of this where efficiency, privacy, and usability might be at risk. I should say though, I absolutely view these two projects as the ones that are doing the best at this. These things have been mitigated and addressed to the extent possible. But a lot of people claim a lot of things in this space. I have taken what I call the BoJack Horseman approach. If you don't watch that show, you absolutely should. There's a great line by Wanda the Owl that says, it's funny, when you look at someone through rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags. And if you're excited about cryptography, which I am, I'm a cryptographer, you look at things that come out. You look at short little white papers with fancy graphics and fancy phrases on them, and you think this must be the answer, this must be the newest best thing. But that is not the way it works. Cryptography and mathematics in this space are extremely subtle, extremely technical, and frankly, extremely boring and ugly. And people just kind of want to throw them together in new and interesting ways. But it does not work like that. You have to be suspicious. For example, this is an absolutely unreadable diagram that I don't expect you to read. This is one of the interaction models in a previous version of Monero, where you have a lot of different cryptographic elements literally fitting together in order to guarantee sender and recipient anonymity. These things are very, very subtle and very tricky. It is trivial to get cryptography wrong. Trivial. There's an old saying that anyone can come up with a cryptographic system that they don't know how to break. But that does not mean that it is provably secure. Integrations are tricky. They are not like building a Lego building where you can rip a room off your Lego house, throw a new gianter room on your Lego house, and have everything fit together. Cryptographic integrations are tricky, so you have to be a little suspicious. But we are absolutely not done. There is literally new research out every single day. You can find lists of academic papers that update daily. Part of my daily routine is doing literature reviews on new papers that come out in academic applied cryptography. We're absolutely not done. What are we looking at improving? Well, we're looking at improving the rate of blockchain growth. Turns out adding privacy features tends to, but not always, increase the speed of blockchain growth. Well, that inhibits new users from joining your network, so you gotta watch out for it. The speed of private transactions. Previously, Zcash, for example, the private transactions were extremely slow and expensive to do. They've been working to improve that, and there's still new ways of doing that that are kind of in the pipeline. Hiding user IP addresses and other metadata that may influence the privacy of transactions that are kind of beyond the cryptographic risk models and actually involve things like network players. And just better transaction obfuscation. You ideally don't want any transaction data to be revealed in certain private transactions. So this is absolutely not done. Anyone who claims that they have figured it out and it is done probably doesn't really know what they're talking about in its entirety. And there are some great new things that are coming out. Monero, for example, just had a big fancy new release that integrated some new technology called bulletproofs that basically improved the structure of their transactions and decreased the size of their blockchain growth hugely. Zcash just did a new software update called Sapling. The goal of that was to change some of their underlying proving systems, and while it didn't remove the ability to do transparent transactions, it made private transactions a lot more compact and a lot faster to do, with the goal of encouraging people to do so. Hopefully it works. Here are my pro tips, takeaways of this in the last minute that I have here. This is what I do when I'm looking at new research and new claims that are made in this space. First of all, you have to have privacy be defined. If any project comes out and just makes broad or vague claims talking about we're private, well, certain forms of privacy involving anonymity and double spend protection and fungibility, a lot of these have extremely technical mathematical definitions, and they need to be formally studied. If they aren't, and you just see broad claims, they probably haven't been well thought through. Second, privacy cannot be optional. We see that in Zcash and plenty of other transaction formulations. It is very, very easy to lose anonymity and fungibility, but it's a one-way street. You can't get it back again. If you publish anonymous information to a public blockchain, you can't take it down. It doesn't work that way. Third, integrations. They're tricky, they are subtle. Making a fungible cryptographic asset is not like a Lego house. You can't just rip things out and throw them back in. Monero's integration of bulletproofs, for example, was a case where we ripped something out and threw it back in again. And it took us about a year of intense analysis to get it right. And even then, it was subtle and tricky. Fourth, flaws do matter, but response matters too. Even in the best projects like Zcash and Monero, and in Bitcoin and other big projects as well. It depends on how willing those projects are to discuss and address flaws. Obviously, you don't want to see them making problem after problem after problem and mistake after mistake. Mistakes will happen, but how they are addressed is very important. Anyone who just kind of brushes off claims without investigating them probably isn't confident enough in their own cryptography. And finally, as I've been saying, you need to ask for the math. If all of this sounds too good to be true, if someone hands you a little 5-page white paper saying, we magically solved it, look at our pretty pictures. No, that is absolutely not the case. It probably is too good to be true if it's claimed to be. You should see real, ugly, well-vetted academic mathematics behind all of this. You absolutely have to. Just saying we have a white paper doesn't mean a damn thing unless it's been vetted by experts. So, I am precisely on time, and I'm glad to be on time. I would be glad to talk about a lot of the other technical details about this afterwards. You can just come and find me outside. It's kind of a whirlwind tour of just some of this space, not even close to all of it. I'm not officially representing Monero today, but if you're interested in our project, please take a look. All of our research is done openly at some of our repositories on the right, and I'm also always available at my pseudonym, Sarang Nother, at Monero, getmonero.org for other discussions. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Pleased to be here.
Alrighty guys, Aaron has actually been a member and attendee to our club a couple times, so happy to see him on stage and extending the conversation. Next up we got Brent Philbin, and he's going to be talking a little bit about the different types of blockchains.
I think I was originally told to stall for a couple of minutes. You can hear this, right? I can't quite hear it on computers. So, there we go, going beyond blockchain. That's what I titled this talk. Like he said, I'm Brent Philbin, and I'm really happy I took one thing out of here, which was a talk about, or a slide, not a talk, about Monero and Zcash, because I would have felt really stupid following Aaron. So, who am I? What do I have to do with anything? There we go. There, that's me. I'm the host of the Crypto Basic podcast. We are a podcast that tries to talk about the basics, talk about the fundamentals. We don't really care about price. We're not talking about trading. We never talk about drawing triangles on a chart, nothing like that. So if you're interested, cryptobasicpodcast.com. And my Twitter handle is @chubbycrypto for obvious reasons. So I wanted to talk a little bit beyond the blockchain. It's a bit of a overarching way to say this. I only had 20 minutes, but I want to talk about a couple of things outside that really excite me. So hopefully at the end of this, you'll have some interest in going forward, learning a little bit more about all the crazy stuff that is possible with blockchain and distributed ledger technology. So it all starts with Bitcoin, because this is where most people originally learned about blockchains. So there's tons of things that we can talk about with Bitcoin. I'm going to focus on just a couple of them, because they're going to apply to the different not blockchain or other things that I'm going to talk about. Decentralization is one of the key aspects of this distributed ledger technology. It isn't the key aspect of every one of them. But Bitcoin was created to kind of be that anarchy decentralization that you see. They also have a rudimentary on-chain governance. It's a real yes-no if a code is going to be accepted. So if you are one of the Bitcoin nodes, miners, you choose, not nodes, just miners, choose whether you're going to continue with a new code upgrade. And finally, it's built on a blockchain. We're at the Florida Blockchain Conference. We're not at the Florida Distributed Ledger Technology Conference. We should be. It's way more to say distributed ledger technologies, but it's more accurate because there are some that are not blockchain. And I'm going to talk about those in a second, but the quick description, distributed ledger technology, is it's a ledger, and who's updating that ledger is distributed. Very, very concise. Blockchain sounds a lot cooler though, And this, of course, is what a blockchain looks like. I wasn't 100% sure what everyone's level of knowledge was when I came in here. This was very last minute. Felipe really fit me in there. I think I emailed him 2 weeks ago and I said, hey, I'm going to be in Gainesville. If you have any room, I'll come talk. So this is all I want to take away from this when I'm talking about the other distributed ledger technologies is that blockchain goes in one direction. There's a block, there's another block, there's another block goes forward. Forget those arrows that are going backwards. It's just they're just pointing to the hashes on those things. But the white arrows are the ones that matter. So directed acyclic graphs are the other distributed ledger technology that I'm going to focus on. They specifically mean that you have multiple directions that your transactions can go in. That's the Wikipedia definition. In mathematics and computer science, a directed acyclic graph is a finite directed graph with no directed cycles. I don't know, that is not a very good definition, but like I said, the trick is they can go in multiple directions. Sometimes they can go in two, sometimes they can go in more than two. But each connection only goes in one direction, so it functions like a blockchain that way. So what are some examples? I'm going to talk about two really quickly. I cannot go into super detail on either one of these because there is a lot to talk about. But Nano and IOTA are the two projects. I might refer them as coins and not be particularly smart about that because I use them interchangeably all the time. But they're two projects that use directed acyclic graphs. Nano uses something called a block lattice, where each person has their own individual blockchain, or each node, person, node, are interchangeable. And the transactions are handled in between the blockchains. And there's also no fees. There is a cost, a computing cost, but there is no fee on the network. IOTA uses something called the tangle, and each transaction confirms two transactions before it. And that has the interesting effect of if there are more transactions on the network, it actually becomes faster and more stable. Whereas when you saw that chart about Bitcoin 2 speakers ago, I think, where you saw the $50 transactions, it costs it costs less to ship somebody gold than it costs to send them Bitcoin at that time. So they're zero fee, and they get faster when they get that network congestion that Bitcoin got. So that's their kind of trick there. This is what the block lattice looks like. Each of those blue lines, just lays right here, right? And there, yeah. Each of those blue lines is its own little blockchain. Each of the greens are a receive, and each of the reds are a send. So that this blockchain moves in two directions. It can go in the future or go into the past. Each blockchain sends those transactions, closes out with another one of the blockchains, and they do a really, really, really tiny proof of work, and that's the cost. So it's not completely free to use those transactions, but it is feeless, so it doesn't actually cost anything. That has some definite advantages over Bitcoin, but there's going to be trade-offs to every one of these coins. Like Aaron just said, there's no magic bullet with cryptocurrency. You're not going to find one that ticks every check mark. With no fees, almost instant transactions, these take maybe 3 seconds to send. This community was able to send 29 Nano to Venezuela as a philanthropy project and buy all that stuff you see in the picture. Without looking it up, some of you may know the price of Nano, some of you may not. The price of Nano right now, and approximately the same when this happened, is around $2. So Venezuela is a case study in what can happen when the currency of a country is mismanaged, or the country itself maybe is mismanaged. And they actually recently, after this happened, they had to take away 5 zeros from their currency. If you had $10,000, you woke up, you had less than a lot. So, what are the trade-offs? There's trade-offs at every point. In Nano, the biggest trade-off is that they don't really have a dedicated development team. There was no ICO, there was no private sale, so they're kind of kept together through that same donation philosophy that they used with Venezuela. And also, because they're a small network, you're always trading off with security. So Bitcoin's network is the best, most robust, because it's the most secure. And we know it's secure because if it could have been attacked, it would have been attacked so far. Well, maybe we don't know that. New things come out all the time. But that's the big trade-off for Nano. That's what the tangle looks like. That is where, with IOTA, I told you that each transaction will confirm 2 previous transactions, it creates this. There's actually a live version of this on, I shouldn't have the name of the website, but if you look up Tangle Visualize, you'll see this. And IOTA is really their overarching goal is Internet of Things. That's why they're called IOTA, IoT, I don't know what the A stands for, but they're trying to catch that vision where you can take your car, go park in a parking spot, automatically pay a tiny transaction with IOTA because there's no fee. Remember, they go, cost nothing, so you can pay 3 cents to park in a spot that you would not normally be charged for. Maybe it's too easy of a spot to access to charge $1 for, but you can charge 3 cents for it. While your car is sitting there, somebody can come in and use your car, automatically send you nano for using your car, bring it back, put it back in the same spot. Now that kind of falls apart if they're self-driving cars, but the idea is the same. Maybe your sprinklers can communicate with the local weather station and know whether they need to turn on or not. You have them set for a schedule every day, but why water when it's going to rain in 2 hours? So, and they can send a half of a penny or a tenth of a penny in order to get that information. Of course, there's trade-offs with IOTA as well. That network, like I said, the more use, the more secure it becomes. It's not secure yet. It's being secured by something called the network coordinator, which is held and controlled by the IOTA Foundation. It's not open source, and that's a clear centralization aspect. And another honest trade-off is the team are very immature. They don't handle criticism well. If you go check them out on Twitter, they are not. They're not who you want representing a company. But these aren't necessarily companies, so there's an interesting space. But still, a really awesome technology that isn't blockchain. That's going to really wrap up my not blockchain stuff, because this is actually going to be talking about blockchain, but it's still kind of beyond, because it's governance. The thing that I want to talk about here at first is Bitcoin's governance is really very, very simple. I know I said the blockchains go in one direction. I don't know why these arrows are pointing backwards, but again, I didn't change it. But if you want to make a change to Bitcoin, there is a point when you diverge. There's a new rule and an old rule. Sometimes this just means that this old rule group dies if enough people have moved on to the new rule. Sometimes it creates a fork. Sometimes it creates Bitcoin Cash. But that is their rudimentary governance system. It is just a yes or a no, and then they go forward. But other projects have moved forward and expanded upon the idea of governing on a blockchain. So the Decentralized Autonomous Organization that you probably have heard about is the Ethereum one. They had created a decentralized autonomous organization that didn't necessarily control their code or control what happens with the Ethereum blockchain, but it was supposed to pay the developers and all that, and that's why we have Ethereum Classic, because there was a hack. But the DAO that we're going to talk about today is going to be on Dash. Dash uses a DAO that uses a treasury. So when Bitcoin's mined, whoever finds that block, 100% of that goes to the miner, the individual miner, which is why that's such a huge reward at this point that they have mining pools and they share that reward. On this blockchain, 10% of each of those block rewards goes towards this Dash, towards Dash treasury. And anyone can vote, or I'm sorry, not vote. Anyone can propose a spend of that money. So that 10% gets put into a pool, and if I want to have, let's say, a rainbow unicorn represent Dash at the newest Las Vegas casino, I can put in that proposal. It's probably not going to get voted yes. They go to the voting, and the way the voting works is anyone with 1,000 Dash can actually vote yes or no. If it passes, right here, the pass-fail stage goes to funding. And there's a super block that funds all of the proposals that are passed on that DAO, and they're all funded at the same time. A lot of times this is going to be for marketing. You'll notice that sometimes when you take a flight, you'll see marketing for Dash right on the seat. That's one of the things they decided to do was international. I won't even go into the particulars of the Dash blockchain and why it might be better than Bitcoin or why it might not, because because this is what excites me about it. The ability to have this treasury to do really cool things, like this. I don't know if you know who this guy is. This is Ben Swan. He's an investigative journalist who was fired by Fox News and CNN wouldn't touch him. Now, what you think about what he says aside, he was in a unique situation where he could not continue to do his brand of investigative journalism and still keep up either the lifestyle he created or the lifestyle he needed. So he had to shut down. And Dash had a proposal to bring him back. So he's not currently sponsored by them anymore. This is a while ago, but they brought back Ben Swan's reality check and put it on YouTube, and he was paid to do so by the Dash Treasury. So the idea that somebody was paid by a decentralized autonomous organization to be an investigative journalist is extremely interesting to me, because they are not beholden to whatever the ideals of the network they might be working for are, or whatever the ideals of the person who owns that network might be interested in reporting. Like I said, they both hate him. The CNN, Fox News both hate this guy. He's got some out there ideas, but he does present facts. He does present research. He might be a little out there with conclusions now and then, but it's still super interesting that they were able to bring him back. He's now sponsored by another one called Smart Cash, I think. I don't know anything about that. I just know they sponsor him because I've seen some of his videos. So what are the trade-offs? Dash, biggest trade-off. Now there's a couple, but the biggest one here is that, like I said, you need 1,000 Dash before you can vote on any of the proposals. You know, the price of Dash is, depending on, I don't check prices as often as I should, but it's somewhere around $150, $170, something there. So you need to have between that many $1,000 to even be allowed to vote on the network. So that's a little bit of a centralization problem, and it kind of develops a plutocracy, which, to be fair, those people do have the biggest incentive for doing the right thing for the network, the right thing for the coin, but at the same time, if you're a normal person who doesn't have that much money laying around, then you can't participate. So that was just a quick, very, very quick scratch of the surface. And my kind of goal here with this talk was to get you interested in learning something, anything. Whatever your current favorite thing to do, your current favorite thing to be a part of, there may already be a project that's starting to work on that involves distributed ledger technologies. These are just a random collection. I didn't give the disclaimer that I usually give at the beginning. Obviously not a financial advisor in any way. I'm not sponsored by any of these. I have a negative view of IOTA, which I just talked about nicely. But these are just some cool use cases. There's a Brave browser out there, which in my opinion is strictly better than Chrome, strictly better than Firefox. That's privacy focused, and they're going to kind of revolutionize the way ads are presented to you. Ontology network. You want to prove that you're a person, but you don't want to show somebody your license. That's what they're trying to do. They want to eliminate the fake person problem on Reddit that you would see, a lot of different things like that. Engine, let's say you're playing Fortnite, you've got a really cool skin, and you want to transfer that over to, I don't know, Dota 2. You can do that. That's what Engine's trying to accomplish. Digix is putting gold on the blockchain. Golem, you can use thousands of computers across the world to do graphics rendering for you. And VeChain is an interesting one where you can just take it from start to finish, see what happened with a good or maybe a service. So you can know that for instance, a medicine was not tampered with from beginning to end. So if any of that was interesting to you, go out there, learn more, because the most important thing that we're missing in this space is education. There are a lot of people who will do the baseline research. They'll figure out you need to be in Bitcoin. They'll tell mom buy Bitcoin. They don't even know what it is. They don't know the first thing. So even baseline knowledge, even learning a little bit, will take you forward and help you expand the space and learn. Now it might not be worth anything. I didn't mention price. This also may not catch on as a technology. I think it will. I think everything that I look into makes me feel like I'm using the internet in 1991. Like, I feel like I'm going over to my phone, dragging the line all the way over to my computer, going through a 3-minute logon process to America Online, and praying that mom didn't come home and pick up the phone without asking me if I was on the internet first. It may also be something that sounds great and ends up being completely useless. I don't even know if anybody knows what this is. That's Google Glass. Everybody thought that was going to change the world, and nobody uses that at all. So the takeaway is go forward, learn, and if you have any questions you want to talk to me, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on my credentials because I don't have any. I was a professional poker player, which gave me an insight into high-risk decisions with not all of the information. I guess I say was, I still am. But that's my Twitter, that's my email, and you can do there. I didn't actually expect to have a minute left. I do. So I can't keep making stuff up. If anybody had a question about what I presented, I know it's pretty quick. I can answer that. If not, I can play myself off the stage. Nope, no questions. Yeah, look, I don't know how to code. I don't know how to do anything. I went out and learned and then decided I'm going to present that. We have over 150 episodes of the podcast now, and hopefully that has helped some people learn and going forward. So I appreciate your time, and don't need Google Glass.
All right, so I guess so far people have had a lot of discussions about blockchain and blockchain projects. I think it's a good time to talk about potential investors in those blockchain projects. So here, to me, actually, the initial coin offering process is a process that actually brings together the blockchain entrepreneur and the potential investors. You see that the entrepreneur would actually create and sell those tokens to outside investors, and in this process they actually raise the money they need to run the projects. And those investors would actually get the tokens, and the tokens will be typically listed on the secondary market. So they actually can trade on the tokens and potentially make some profit. And you see here in the middle, the entrepreneur does need to make some online platform to run the process here. And this is a typical timeline of an ICO. So in the beginning, the entrepreneur would actually announce an idea. Together with the ideas, they actually would form a team to actually do the ICO and also the associated business. And after that, they would come up with a white paper which has a lot of information. The white paper typically would have information about the business, the information about what the company will do in the future, and also a lot of information about the ICO itself. And often they would have a website. The website has similar information to the white paper, but the website would feature the white paper also run the ICO through the website. And a lot of the times, the entrepreneur would also publish their initial code on GitHub and some other alternative websites, so people can actually read the code and see what they are actually doing. Are they really doing what they're saying in the white paper on the website, right? And then marketing is actually quite an important process here. They actually would do a lot of marketing on social networks like Reddit and also on crypto forums like Bitcoin Talk. And then after that, some of the ICOs would run a pre-sale. So a pre-sale is a kind of smaller scale offering to some preferred investors, to some large investors. And also sometimes those entrepreneurs would use funds from the pre-sale to fund the actual ICO process. And after the pre-sale, we actually have the big ICO, right? And then what's really important for those investors is actually listing. If the ICO is a success, investors would expect that they're going to list the tokens on some exchange, and then the investors could potentially cash out by sending their coins to other investors. So this is just kind of the table of the largest ICOs to date. You see that some of these are really big, like this Dragon Coin. They actually made about $320 million, right, through the sale. And you see Huobi and also the other one, HADC. These are very big ones, even compared to IPOs. I guess you guys all know that traditionally companies need to raise funds through an IPO, right? So basically, you actually sell stock to potential investors, and you actually will list the stock on some stock exchange. So even comparing those proceeds to proceeds in typical IPOs, these are pretty large. Now, this is a kind of a typical ICO, what the typical ICO looks like, right? So here, they usually would have a clock, right? So showing how many days are left, right, to the timestamp to the second. And they would typically say, right now there's a bonus, right, 10% bonus, 20% bonus. And then almost all the ICOs would also show the progress, how much money they have already raised. And this is the soft cap. Soft cap is the minimum amount that's required for the project to be a success. And you see that in this case, the entrepreneur already raised more money than the soft cap, so this is already a success. And this is an online exchange for cryptos. But there were more information on websites like that, right? You can see more detail about the ICO, you can see the timeline, you can see the team, right? Stuff like that. And I'm sure that many people know this famous coin, right? It's called the Dogecoin. It was initially as a joke. This Dogecoin was introduced in December 2013, and they actually sold 1 million of coins. And shortly after the coin was listed, the price shot up to almost $400 per coin. However, on the next day, the price completely collapsed to almost zero. So you see that on December 14th, the total market cap of Dogecoin was 15% of US GDP last year. So it was just crazy thing, right? However, it collapsed, and then the market cap went down a lot. However, still today, Dogecoin ranked among the top 20 coins around the globe. So I actually gathered the ICO data together with my co-authors. We actually get the data from ICO Bench, which is a well-known online collector of ICO information. We also use other alternatives like ICO ratings. So in our data, up to the first quarter this year, there were total around 1,600 ICOs. And this is a plot of quarterly numbers of open ICOs, which are shown in those blue bars. And this red line is the percent of successful ICOs, defined as, if you have raised enough money above the soft cap, which is the minimum threshold. And you see that in 2016, there were very few ICOs around. However, the volume really took off in the second quarter of last year. And if you look at the second quarter and the third quarter of this year, there were even more ICOs. However, the average proceed raised is sort of going down due to the down market right now. And also the percent of successful ICOs is kind of trending down as well. And this is kind of a tabulation of most popular countries of incorporation for the ICO enterprises. You see that the US is actually the largest one, making up 80% of all the ICOs, and Russia was the second. And then we have other popular destinations like Singapore, Switzerland, right? And what's interesting is, looks like the ICOs from Russia are more likely to fail than the other regions or countries. And here I'm showing you a distribution of ICOs across different industries. On the top are actually financial services, which this is not surprising given that given that in the beginning a lot of the blockchain developers actually want to to make finance decentralized. Finance is a very centralized industry, and you actually see enterprises like Ripple, right, and similar financial services companies. They actually want to decentralize finance. And however, gaming and virtual reality is actually pretty big relative to other types of ICOs. And as you know, still right now, Ethereum is the most popular underlying blockchain platform for those ICOs. Ethereum-based ICOs actually made up about 77% of all the ICOs. And some very serious ICOs, they actually develop their own platforms, and we see that waves-based ICOs actually ranked number 3 here. And then you see lots of other types of blockchain platforms underlying the ICOs. So our team actually collected a lot of data here. I'm just showing you a small portion of the variables we have collected. Soft cap is actually quite important because this is the minimum threshold for an ICO to be successful. We see that the average is about $6.7 million. That is pretty large, right? Because this is the average across all the ICOs. And we see that on average, an ICO would raise about $19 million, right? I mean, this number includes these fail. And this number is only for successful ICOs. But if you contrast with the failed ones, you see that the failed ICOs only raised about $3 million on average. And if you look at the number of subscribers in the private market, the difference is huge, right? For a successful ICO, we see thousands of investors buying into the ICO. However, for the failed ones, the average is only about 30. So there's a huge contrast between successful ICOs and failed ones. And successful ICOs on average would take about 1 month. These are calendar days, but if we look at failed ones, that takes slightly longer, right? About 38 days. And I think this graph is actually the focus of my presentation. And this is actually the daily token sales, conditional on whether this is successful ICO or this is failed ones. So these blue bars show the daily fraction of token sales for the successful ones, and those orange ones are for the failed ones. You see that on the first day, for the successful ICOs, we see a lot of volume, right? That's 15% of all the tokens that are offered in the sale. And on the second and third day, the volume actually dropped a lot, but still there were quite some volume for successful ones. However, for the failed ICOs, we never see that the volumes would actually take off. So if you fail on the first day, if you fail to generate enough excitement among investors on the first day, you're really doomed to fail here. And this process is actually pretty transparent. Investors all see how many tokens the ICO would actually raise on the first day. So this dashed line is actually the cumulative fraction of tokens that were sold. And we can zoom in to see what happens in the first day, right? This is just a 30-day plot. And if we zoom in to the first day, you see a pretty similar pattern. And this is an hourly pattern, right? So this first bar shows the first hour token sale as a fraction of the total tokens that are offered. You see that in the first hour alone, in successful ICOs, the entrepreneurs actually sold about 8%, 7% of all the tokens on offer, and you see few sales afterwards. However, for the failed ones, you see very little volume even during the first hour. And we can even zoom in, right? We can zoom in to see the block level sales, and now we are down to the block level, block by block sales. Right, you see this is the first block. Still, there were a lot. I mean, during the first block, which is about 14 seconds, you see that there were a lot of volume, right, for the successful ones, and then the volume is sort of, going down gradually afterwards. But for the failed ones, you see very little stuff going on in the first few blocks, not to mention afterwards. And this is just the token returns for the average token on the secondary market. You see that the first day return is very large. This is the mean and this is the median, right? The mean is actually in red and the median is in blue. You see that on average, the first day return is more than 150%. So we sometimes call this underpricing in finance. If you compare first day return in ICO versus IPO, the IPO first return is only about 25%. So it looks like if you are able to buy into the average coin, and if you sell by the end of the first day, you can make about 150% in just one day. However, this is the average, right? If you look at the median, it's much smaller. The median is about 25%. However, if you go along, right? If you look at the buy and hold return for 1 month, for 3 months, and for 6 months, or just go to 1 year, actually the median returns are all negative. So actually at median you are going to lose money. Okay? And so actually the picture is very skewed, right? It's very skewed. On average, you are going to make a lot of money, but in the median case, you're going to lose money. And this is the difference between those token returns and the corresponding horizon of Bitcoin return. You see that on average, you still make money, even going to 1 year, but in terms of the median case, you lose a lot of money. And actually, that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
All right, I have no, whoa. And the mic. Put it back on. All right, am I good now? Okay. So I don't have slides, just make a quick presentation. How many of you have been here pretty much all day? Okay, very good. I'm here to tell you that there's a good possibility you have wasted your day. Because there are 3 things going on that could doom blockchain. And that's what I want to talk about. They basically boil down to poor governance, poor regulation, and poor regulation. So let me start with the poor governance. How many of you have acquired, traded, been involved in cryptocurrencies? Just raise your hands. Okay, keep your hands up. You've been involved, all right? How many of you that have been involved have actually gone and studied the computer code for those currencies? Okay, a few of you have. How many of you that have studied those keep up with all the changes that occur in those blockchains, those blockchains code? All right, just 3 of you. Okay, this demonstrates something to us, right? So you've all heard that blockchain is trustless. For all of you that put your hands down, you're trusting someone else to have written that computer code well and to have maintained it according to your understanding. It is not a trustless system. You're trusting someone. In this case, computer coders, which, how many of you code? All right? Okay, coders are pure at heart, right? I think it's everyone here. But outside of this room, there are some bad coders. In fact, Professor Lee was talking about all these ICOs that he had looked at. There was a study done at the University of Pennsylvania. Look at just the top 50. The top 50 ICOs. Studied the white papers. White paper said, here's what we're doing. And then there was a computer code that was what they really did. They found that on several issues, I'll focus on one, a very critical issue of, are the people launching the coins, are they going to pump and dump? In other words, when they say we are not going to kind of commit fraud with all the people who buy these, they have their white paper says we're not going to do that. Only 15% of them actually wrote that into the computer code. So 85% made a promise, no commitment in the computer code at all. And unless you studied the computer code, you didn't know that. So you had to trust those people were doing the right thing, and 85% of them were not. At least not in the computer code. That gets us to an issue of governance. If you have to trust people that they've done and maintained the computer code correctly, there needs to be some way that you can trust them. Generally do that through some trusted agent. Palaszczuk's a bright and honest person. So if she oversaw those, we could all trust them. But she can't oversee all of them. So we have to have some other systems. Palaszczuk's doing some research in that area, but it gets involved in transparency, reference to authority, all these different things that we can then have some trust in the system. The Winklevoss twins, we're also working on this. But failing to have a governance structure that we can trust, we get into the second problem, that is our first set of regulations. How many of you are American citizens? Okay. So, if you're an American citizen and you're trying to be involved in cryptocurrencies, the Internal Revenue Service says that you're dealing with assets. The Security Exchange Commission says you're dealing with securities. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission hasn't quite made up its mind what you're doing yet. The Federal Trade Commission has not yet figured out what you're doing. We have some conflicting regulations in the U.S. that maybe won't kill blockchain, but they're certainly going to make it expensive. And that is why you see a lot of ICOs trying to go outside the U.S. But once you've gone outside the U.S. with your blockchain, if an American citizen is involved, the U.S. regulations apply. And so it just makes things kind of expensive. May not kill it, but may make it kind of expensive. The third regulations is something called General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, out of the European Union. How many have heard of this? All right, it's all about privacy, right? It does a lot of different things. The EU worked on this for a long time, launched and implemented the regulations this year. One of the key provisions of the GDPR is that if you are a large enough company and you have a database that includes information about EU citizens, you have to have provisions whereby that EU citizen can inspect what's in your database, ask you to change it, and even ask you to delete it. Good luck doing that with blockchain. It's supposed to be immutable, which means that you're not supposed to be able to erase information out of the blockchain. But the EU says you have to. And the EU also says if anyone that is not following this law and is found in violation, they can be fined up to 4% of their global revenues, which is a huge fine for a large company. For a small company, it's still a huge fine. And there can be private lawsuits against you. So this is in direct conflict with blockchain. Because some blockchains, as Jason was talking about earlier, don't have a central owner. But I doubt the EU will say, oh darn, I just can't enforce my law. No, they'll find a way. They may go after the founders, they may go after the miners, they may go after participants, they will go after someone to enforce that law. Someone will be held accountable, and someone will have to figure out how it is that we remove data off an immutable database. So, 3 reasons why you may have just wasted your day. But at least lunch was good, I'm sure, and the coffee was great. All right, thank you very much.
Better?
Better, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's intimidating to go after Dr. Jameson after he just said that you wasted your day. But I'm the last person. I know it's been a long day with a lot of information, so I'm going to try to make it short and sweet. I have slides, but I'm not even going to go through them. I'm just going to talk to you guys and then let you guys go celebrate your homecoming weekend. So, a lot of information was covered from our panel, and a lot of why blockchain has gotten so much attention is because cryptocurrencies have taken the world by storm. And a lot of why that is because we've given it so much value. But why do cryptocurrencies have value? Because I think all of us know in this room that it's just a code. Why are we giving just a code value? And Dr. Lee went over this. ICOs basically made that happen. That
the central token model is we, the developers, have created a network, and you can only use this specific network for this specific coin, and you're mandated to use it if you want to trade with it. And that's how cryptocurrencies get value, because it's exclusivity, essentially. So I know a lot of people went over how blockchain works, and essentially, I'm going to glaze over this. Blockchain allows us to record a lot of information, and distributed ledger technology is one of the things that came out of that. And because of that, we're able to use it across several different sectors, but a lot of people don't know that the digital economics don't necessarily have to be within just currency. The economics of the digital realm are more of how we interact with each other and the rules that we've defined and are governed by. Dr. Gabe mentioned this, regulation and governance is a problem, and it's difficult to govern a system like that, except the system itself is a governance system. So it can be applied to quite a few different things. Economics isn't just how I give you my crypto coin, any tokens or coins. It's also things like energy, for example. You can have peer-to-peer transfer of energy just by having it on a blockchain system. Voting, for example, medical records, which I know a lot of this was gone over, so I'm not going to go into the details. But essentially, I think at the end of the day, we should at least go away with this. You might have wasted your time, but whether you got any information out of this entire day, just be more open to the idea that we don't necessarily know what the potential of blockchain technology is to its fullest just yet. And there are quite a few different arguments across sectors. For example, I was talking to Dr. Jameson right beforehand about how utility transfer or power energy, what about those countries that don't have access to internet? Except implementing blockchain technology into those kind of sectors would give those countries access to internet. So I think it's important to remember that blockchain allows a lot more than we think it can do, not just cryptocurrencies. And while cryptocurrencies may not last, blockchain technology is probably going to be implemented in quite a few different areas within the next 5 years. So I'm going to end with that. If you guys have any questions, feel free to come up afterwards. And as Rob mentioned earlier, and a lot of you here know, we have a big tank, and we will be having a meeting tomorrow right before the tailgate, if any of you guys are interested in attending. So I'll end with that. And any questions? All right.
Thank you to all of you guys for coming out. I hope we all learned a lot. I know I did from these speakers. If anyone still has questions, we're an open book. Please reach out, gatorblockchain@gmail.com. We want to get as much engagement and as much involvement as we can generate from events like this. So please, don't let this be the only time you're seeing us. Come out to our club. We're going to have a meeting this Wednesday at Stuzen Hall 104.
Tailgate.
And the tailgate, yes, tomorrow at 1 p.m.
Noon.
Sorry, at noon, we're going to have a tailgate in front of Live West. So there's going to be beer, drinks, food, more drinks. Come out. We'll have fun, guys. We'll get the dub against Missouri. So thanks all for coming out.